Good evening. Welcome to the April 10th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty. We'll start with announcements. Anybody have any announcements?
I do have two. Good evening, everyone. Let me just pull it up. Got some phone calls from this, so I figured I'd just read the statement. So Westchester County government has confirmed 8 cases of measles in Westchester County, all from northern Westchester. None of the children attend public schools or child care programs. The children ranging in ages 6 months to 14 years old. The Westchester County Department of Health is working with the families and healthcare providers to identify locations where the children may have been exposed to others. Anyone who has not been vaccinated can get a free vaccine through the Westchester County Department of Health by calling 914-995-5800 for an appointment. So that was a pretty big announcement today from the Department of Health, and I figured I should announce it here. On a lighter note, Galata House has been doing a Crowdwise fundraiser as part of a national campaign, and they're pretty close to reaching $15,000, and they're going to be celebrating the end of their Crowdwise campaign at a networking event tomorrow at the Briarcliff Manor. That's tomorrow, Thursday, April 11th, from 6:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., and it's a donation of $25 per ticket. So that's all.
Great. Anyone else? Annie? All right, then I'll just remind folks it's April, and that means there's lots of Earth Day related events. The first one that I'm aware of in Ossining is tomorrow, April 11th. It's the Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series screening, and the title of this screening is Source to See. There's a short film that is brought to us by Riverkeeper with the filmmaker John Bowermaster. And it's a really special presentation because they're following the short film will be a presentation by Ossining High School students who are part of the environmental group that has been working with Riverkeeper to study the health and cleanliness of our water right down here at the Ossining waterfront, where we once had a public beach and now still have that little area next to the park, which there has been some effort to actually reopen that beach, and I imagine that will be a topic of discussion. I believe that Jackie Shaw, council member Jackie Shaw, will be part of the panel, as well as environmental studies teacher from the high school, Mr. Artie Carlucci, and 3 students from the group at the high school that has been doing the study, and Jennifer Benson from Riverkeeper will be. It'll be a big panel following the short film and presentation, and as usual, that is at 6:30 p.m. It's free to the public at the Ossining Public Library. Next Thursday, we continue with the short films from John Bowermaster, and it's the full set of his 3 short films that he's done for this season in partnership with Riverkeeper. And it's going to be at an unusual location for the documentary discussion series. It's going to be at the Sing Sing Hill Brewery. An hour later than our usual start time. We'll start at 7:30 in the evening, and it's 3 short films at 75 Spring Street, which is the Sing Sing Hill Brewery, starting at 7:30, and admission is free to anyone who would like to join us. Following the film will be a Q&A with the filmmaker and with a representative from Riverkeeper as well. And then the month wraps up with Westchester County's biggest Earth Day celebration, brought to us by Green Ossining, the Earth Day Festival at the Ossining Waterfront on Saturday the 27th from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m., 5 p.m. Come on down. It's a day of music and food and fun activities, hands-on activities, fun for everybody. So that's the 27th of April.
I did forget one item, and I apologize. And I thank Supervisor Levenberg for the email because I could not be there on Tuesday. Town of Ossining Highway Superintendent Michael G. O'Connor is retiring tomorrow, April 11th. And for those, I don't know who doesn't know, Michael G. through various roles in the community through years, but I just wanted to personally, on record, say thank you for his years of service in all his capacities as a veteran, as an elected official. He's worked with the village in many capacities. I'm pretty sure I could say on behalf of the whole board that we're extremely grateful and wish him the best.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for saying that.
All right. Madam Manager.
Thank you. I have a couple announcements, if that's all right,
Great.
before we start the program. I do want to update the board. We have hired PACE Land Use Law Center to help us with the comprehensive plan outreach strategy. And you can see the first document is ready, and it's both in English and Spanish. So when all of these come in, we'll be able to start distributing them. Mayor, yourself, and Trustee Bazemore, you will be receiving a call later next week, to set up our first meeting so that you can begin the discussion on who you want in the executive committee, and PACE will be helping us put that together. So it's exciting to start getting that together, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm very excited that PACE is going to be helping us with this. It's something that they do very well, and I'm excited to have that on board. Second of all, I want to let the board know that Mayor Garrity and myself met with Rose Noonan to talk about the RFQ process. And we went over how this is going to work, and we went over some timelines, and I want to share those timelines with you very quickly. Between now and May 15th, Rose will put together a draft document. Her and I will vet it out the best way that we can, and then after that, we will share that with the board and have a discussion just to make sure that we're on target with what the initiatives of the board will be. We're hoping to be able to launch the RFQ on May 30th or June 1st. We will give developers about 45 days to put their proposals together and their qualifications and some ideas on what they might do with the site. So that'll run through mid-July. We will take some time, the board, and with Rose's assistance, through August 1st to review them, and then we will do our due diligence on the top 2 candidates for this. We'll do interviews and discussions, and the board will be involved in all of that, and then making a selection. So our anticipated award, should we find a proposal that is a really great proposal and all of you are comfortable with, would be early September, perhaps first or second meeting in September. So I just wanted to set that time frame for you, and we're all looking forward to getting started. So are there any questions on that, on either one? Nope. Okay, great. Then we will start into our program for today. We want to continue our discussion on some minor modifications to downtown parking. I do have maps of them because I think sometimes it's easier
Do overhead?
if we can talk about them with the map of each location up there. And then what I would like to do is we'll just do Academy Place first, then we'll do St. Paul's Place second, and then we'll talk about Central Avenue. In the memo that you received, there were some other areas, and that was really Stuart and I driving around saying, oh, what about this and what about that? But really the core of our discussion is Central Avenue, Academy Place, and St. Paul's Place.
Oh, we didn't turn off the lights. We turn off the dais light.
Is that up there?
That one, Mark's got it. We have perimeter lights.
And the one's right over.
There's 2 perimeter lights. Yep, there you
Bingo.
go. We can leave
Alright.
these backlights on so we don't. It's not too
There
late
we
to-
That's fine, right? Yeah.
Sit here and not be on the TV.
Okay. All right, so Jamie, if you would pull up Academy Place first, that would be great. Paul will be here shortly. He's running just a little bit late. We had another appointment, but he'll be here to talk about the projects as well. Kevin, thank you so much. You have given me some great insight on things that have happened in the past and, a lot of things to talk about. So I'm glad that you're here and that we can all talk about it together and then come up with a decision on how we want to move ahead.
The internet is a little slow today.
Oh, okay. Well, visualize Academy Place.
I can't get there without it opening. So
Yeah, it's okay.
That's the magic.
I go through work sessions. I'm glad to learn another
Okay.
way.
Ta-da! Academy Place currently allows parking during the day, and there are no markings for parking, there's no limits for parking, and it has been brought to our attention by several residents that perhaps this could be a location for overnight parking as an addition. So through discussions with the chief and with Paul, we really are recommending that daytime parking continue to be as it is now, but overnight parking be allowed on one side of the street with alternate sides, like we do in other locations. That allows the street to be cleaned, it allows it to be plowed. There's about the same number of spots on both sides. I think it's one off. But that's what we're thinking for that side. So does anybody, I mean, I'm not sure if you want to just comment as we go along, or you want to wait, or?
Do you want to comment on this? Please.
Yeah, great.
So one of the problems with what you're seeing here is that not all of the cars that are there are currently legally parked.
Correct.
Oh, I turned myself off instead of on. This is backwards. Okay. It's up for whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
Some of the problems here is that the cars that you can see on that map are currently parked in spots they wouldn't be permitted to be parked on a regular day. For instance, the first car on the north side of Academy Place, on the northwest side there, is too close to the corner, being parked right at the line.
Yep.
So that car wouldn't be permitted to park there. These spots on the bottom, which are adjacent to where the CrossFit gym is, those are also blocking a driveway, which is sometimes used and sometimes not, but one way or another, it's a curb cut and they're not permitted to park there. So probably 2 of those cars wouldn't be permitted. And I believe that one of the other ones on the south side there toward the west end is also, one's probably too close to the corner, another one's probably also blocking a curb cut. So what I would recommend is that it should be, I have no issue with overnight parking, but I would rather see it on one side. And what I'd spoke to Paul about for engineering was that, and we have this on sections of State Street, where there's a period from, say, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., or rather from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for sanitation purposes, where it would be overnight parking, but there'd be no parking from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on, say, Monday and Wednesday, and they can line up the street sweeper to come through then. There's no issue of sanitation on the north side of the block, so that isn't necessarily an issue. It's only for sweeping, but that would permit it to be swept. And on the south side, there's really very limited parking, and I think that what you'll find if you permit that is folks squeezing into spaces they don't belong, because that's what we have there currently.
So we also talked about lining this so that we know exactly where the spaces are, so it'll be easier for
signs, right?
enforcement. Correct.
Don't park in the corner, can't park here.
Correct.
Active driveway, all that
That
stuff.
is right.
Chief, just so I'm clear, so you're okay with one side of the street and also alternative parking where it's, or only permanently just having one side?
No, what I would recommend is for overnight parking only to be on the north side of the street. And then the solution to the street sweeping issue is just to have, say, like a Monday, Wednesday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. no parking zone for purposes of street sweeping. And we have that in other areas of the village now. It's not common, but it exists.
So let me ask why, if, my only reason.
I kind of like this work.
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
I enjoy being a guest at the meetings sometimes. My only reason for wanting to have alternate side overnight is to make sure that the streets do get swept on both sides, because that's always preferable. You know, Paul can confirm when he arrives, but if there's a way for us, if it's part of our regular course of business, that on certain blocks, we can do street sweeping from an 8 to 10 a.m. certain days of the week, whatever, like New York City is more, I'm more familiar with that approach there, then why wouldn't we want to have overnight on both sides?
The south side of the street, we tend to find more problems. The other thing that gets used for early in the morning is the Beeline buses, when they start their first routes in the morning, tend to stage there. And I know that's not something we're responsible for that we do. But we see a lot of issues with people parking on that side of the street and blocking things. I mean, we attend to block driveways on a daily basis in all kinds of places. I think that if you allow people to squeeze into there for overnight parking, I think you're going to see more and more of that. But
Isn't that an enforcement issue? And it's like at the police station.
it's 5 spots on one side, it's more spots on the other side. You're asking my opinion, I'm telling you, I think that you'd be better off keeping the more spots on the north side of the street. I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze to move people across the street and then eliminate some of the spots that are already available. If we're looking to expand.
I'm suggesting overnight on both sides. The
Right.
only reason to do
On both
alternate
sides at the same
only
time?
reason to my mind to do alternate overnight is for street sweeping. If we accommodate for street sweeping at another time of the week, I don't see a reason to not do overnight on both sides. If what we're talking about is an enforcement issue, that people could be trained relatively quickly, I would think, if, you know, you get
Yeah,
a
I
couple
mean,
of tickets.
it's just this, the south side of the
Same-
street
it's the
always
same
presents a
offenders.
challenge because it's not many spots and people try to squeeze a lot into that. I mean, as far as why it would be, why we wouldn't just have both sides all the time, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I don't have an immediate objection to it, but
Do you think, I mean, if we are gonna be we're gonna be marking
Marking them.
that,
I haven't
so
had
that
that
will be, you know, they will limit people parking and blocking the driveways.
one would hope
Sort
that
of.
people would observe signs and park in the lines that we draw. We don't seem to have a lot of success at that on all the other streets where we have those things, but one would hope.
But your concept-wise, will that be okay?
Conceptually, the more signs and lines you put down to tell people exactly what they're supposed to do, the more specific we are. Obviously, that always is preferable. You know, the south side just tends to be a place where people sort of park where they can.
I understand that.
How many spots on that?
So there's 8 on one side and 9 on the other. 9 on the north side, 8 on the south side.
That's not including the illegal curb cuts.
Yeah,
and all
if
that
you
stuff
take
in the
all those
driveway.
illegal things
There's-
off, the chief is right.
There's
two-
probably only 6 at best on the south side because that first car is too close to the corner.
Yeah,
The next 2 are there. One of those 2 is definitely in front of the curb cut in that second section.
Yeah.
And that white car, at least the first white car,
Right.
possibly the second, are blocking a curb cut. And I don't know where it begins.
Yeah, so you
at the
can get
next one.
5 down here and 3 up near the building with the parking lot. I mean, it's strange, for sure. It's not solid like it is on the north side, but there's even an area of the north side that needs to be scoped out so that you don't park in front of it. It's a doorway. I mean, I still think that if we wanted to expand it later, we could, but if we tried just overnight parking and then alternate side and see if it works, because when we get to St. Paul's Place, we're gonna be talking about the exact same thing. So if you keep the rule on one and the other exactly the same, it won't be as confusing for people.
but to the mayor's point, if we're able to, so Academy and St. Paul's, if we're able to have alternative street cleaning timed, whether it's 8 to 10 or whatever gets selected, wouldn't that enable us, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, wouldn't that enable us to have more overnight parking?
Sure.
Which is the goal.
And if we have a 2-hour where you can't park there, then we can schedule the street cleaner to come through at that time.
Are we deciding now? We're looking at all of them? What's
Okay,
happening?
let's go to St. Paul's Place. So here you have parking already lined out, and it's 1-hour parking. We thought that was a little odd. I wasn't really sure why there's 1-hour parking there. But we were considering this also for maybe an extended 2-hour parking and basically the overnight parking, additional spots for overnight parking. Again, only one side of the street, alternate side, just to create additional.
How many spots is that? Well, those are actually-
There are, if I can read my notes here,
Looks like they're lined.
8 spaces on, and 8 or 9, 8 on the north and 8 or 9 on the south, but I couldn't tell with the tree. 1, 2, 3, 4,
Looks like there's 2
5,
cars under
6,
there now.
7, 8. There's 8 and 8.
8 on the
And a
north
big truck,
and 8 on the south.
right.
So what's the recommendation here? Were you gonna speak or who's speaking?
I don't know what your recommendation was. If I was looking
It
at this, I'd say that at best, one side alternate, because if you park on both sides of the road and we have any amount of snow, I mean, everything has to be judged by the worst-case scenario.
Wouldn't that
It-
be a snow emergency though? Like, so if, I mean, it would
If we
fall
did-
under like any other street, right?
Oh, that's what we were talking about last time, that
Yeah.
we be making these 2 streets emergency roads in case of a snow.
We'd be adding
So,
it to the
It will
list.
be
so
added to
Academy,
the list.
Academy Place and St. Paul's are distinct because, from one another, because one's a one-way.
Right.
And that makes it really different from Academy, which is actually relatively wide. You know, the challenge here is also that you have sanitation here where you don't have that necessarily on, you know, there's the house on the corner of Academy and State Street, but those folks can put their cans either on the corner or on the other side. They have space to get a frontage. Where the church, the businesses, all their dumpsters are in the back. So all of their garbage, their cardboard, which is significant for the pharmacy and the other businesses, all comes out on St. Paul's Place. So if there's cars parked there, sanitation's going to have significant troubles. Also, I know that Paul had talked about snow emergency for both of these. That was his preference. I'd defer to him because, you know, they're driving the
And
plows.
he's
It's
here.
not really hard. Oh, hey.
Welcome.
Full of questions for you, Paul.
But I would absolutely say that this could not be both sides overnight.
Yeah, I
At
agree.
best, alternate, because it would become impassable in the winter months.
Yeah. And I totally, I agree with that. Paul, do you want to talk about snow emergency and whether we needed to make that a snow route or? Again, we were talking about parking on one side but alternate.
Okay, so with regard to snow, first of all, the cardboard, appreciate that Chief is cognizant of that. There is a lot out there every week. And, you know, that's something that I didn't think of when we were discussing this, but definitely something that if and when we do lay out that option, we'll create some type of swath to be able to access it, like maybe hatch out an area or something like that, or paint the lines a little different to work around what they need to do. But they're doing it now pretty well, and there's, you know, parking there now, and, you know, we'll figure it out if and when. With regard to the bigger issue, which is the snow emergency on St. Paul and Academy, you know, when we started discussing it, and it was asked of me, would you want those to be snow emergency? I think my immediate response was it would be great if every road was snow emergency, because every road, if it was cleared, would make our job a lot easier. But knowing the way we respond to snow emergencies now, which is often supplementing what already exists with permanent signage, if and when we really anticipated a storm that would be problematic, we would just solicit the police department to hand post it in advance, and we would address it that way. So, you know, is that a non-starter for the consideration? No, not at all.
Paul, I'd like to, and I'll just say it into the mic so that everybody can hear it, but I just want to go back and ask you the question to just confirm what we were saying you had said, which is when we went to Academy Place, the idea was that the street sweeping would take place not during the 3 to 6 a.m. period, but we have signage somewhere in the village right now for like an 8 to 10 a.m. street cleaning time a couple of times a week on State Street. And we could perhaps do that on Academy Place, which would allow us to have overnight street parking potentially on both sides of the street and still get the street swept.
Yes, I think the answer is yes. I don't know off the top of my head what's designated for what hours. I would need a guy here for that. But what I think I referenced for street sweeping or the parking limits was just to try to mirror what State Street was, because they're obviously contiguous with State Street, and they would do those at the same time, which is kind of probably what he does now.
Thanks.
Any more questions on those two?
Yeah, can we go back to St. Paul's, because I just want to make sure that I understand what's being, so we're talking about recycle pickup and trash pickup, so that is like 3 days a week, so I don't know that it would necessarily always coincide with alternates. I mean, if we were just talking about recycle day, we could just do alternate side, and it could be alternating and coincide with the recycle schedule for almost every week of the year. If trash is a thing too, then that's 3 days a week and probably wouldn't work. But Paul, if DPW is going to be doing the signage and is going to find a way to ensure access to be able to pick up recyclables and trash, and if we're going to be able to accommodate for snowstorms as needed, then are we doing, what's the compelling Why don't we treat this the same way that we do Academy Place and State Street? Which would be what I'm proposing would be overnight on both sides.
Because if you put overnight on both sides there and it snows, the plow's not even going to be able to get through. I wouldn't make this street
Okay.
overnight on both sides. That
Okay.
it would make it difficult to get through.
Okay, understood.
And the other difference is that, like, during the day, albeit a narrow street, the parking there, because it's short term, tends to be sort of sporadic, where it's not every spot filled every
Not
time.
dense. Okay.
If you have overnight, you can be assured that every one of those spots will be filled. The more parking you create, the more cars just seem to show up.
So then are we talking about 2-hour parking during the day and alternate side overnight? Or were you suggesting just one side overnight? Because,
I was just suggesting one side overnight, because for the exact reason that the chief just said, it's a very narrow road and,
well, but that's, but I'm saying alternate side, one side at a time.
correct.
Okay. Because otherwise, if it's only ever one side, then that side never gets swept. So we're saying alternate side. Okay.
Right. Right. Okay, let's go to Lower Central. That's
Mayor,
the
just so
easy
you
one.
know, everyone knows, on North Malcolm Street, it's 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., no parking Monday, Wednesday, Friday, South Side Tuesday, Thursday. And on State Street, going east, it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and going west, it's Tuesday, Thursday, again, 8 a.m. to 10. Those are the two areas in the village where there's no parking during those 2-hour periods.
All right. Thanks, Stuart. So Central has essentially 3 areas. This is the Lower Central area. Right now, that's designated for train station parking. I don't think that we're recommending any changes to that. I did talk to Paul about perhaps we look at different ways that we can create some signage down in that area so that people looking for spots know that they can go this way for a lot, or this, just because it's very difficult. When we were driving around, if you don't know where those lots are, then you may get frustrated and not know that you can drive one street over and there's more train station parking. So I'm not really proposing anything different here, other than maybe some additional signage to help people find their way to get to those spots. Let's go to Upper, please. So this is a tricky area. There are, next to Brandreth, you'll see the gray car on the right-hand side, and there are 2 spots there, and there are 2 parking meters. We're not proposing to change anything. And from those 2 parking meters all the way to where you see the second firehouse designation for truck traffic, it says 2-hour parking there. I'm not really sure. I think that's probably something that the businesses use. Kevin, I don't know, do you know what they do?
Yeah, there's a handful of businesses there, and people use that 2-hour. If you make that any longer term than that, then the employees, one of the issues that we hear from the park enforcement officers on Main Street is that it's the employees generally of the businesses who are clogging up a lot of the spots, and we try to work with them face to face in conversation to say, like, look, there's better places to park and somewhere else, and we try to direct them away. They are not always so willing to listen. So my perception is that if we turn that to long-term parking, you're simply going to offer that up to employees, and that the businesses will then lose any ability they have. Now, there's not a ton of traffic going in and out of the upholstery business on an all-day basis. There's people coming in and out, but they're not like a storefront necessarily. But Jeter's is there, and they've got a lot of cars coming in and out. We work with them to not keep cars that they're working on outside, but that's always a fact of any automotive or type business. They sometimes pull a car out in order to adjust others. But they do have people coming there to visit their shop for things, and there's not always space in their driveway, so they use those spots outside. Again, if we turn that into all-day parking, I think you're just going to find the businesses out of the ability to park out there, and you're just going to find them used by employees that are working on Main Street.
Yeah, so this section here, we're not proposing any changes. Okay. But now if we go to the central part, okay. So if you look up to the north where the fire station designation is, where it says Central Avenue, from there to the crosswalk, which is just where the tree line is, I think. Can you see that? I don't know.
Can you please zoom?
I don't know if we can or
Where am
not.
I zooming, which part? By the,
Just press plus.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
That's it.
So you can see the crosswalk, it's north of the exit for the walkway or the entrance to the walkway. So in between that section there is an area for on-street parking. What we found is it's 2-hour parking on both sides of the road, which makes it kind of difficult. Kevin will talk about the fire station, when the guys come to the station for events and for response, that they park on the south side of Central Avenue, but there is no sidewalk on that side, and if you look at where the center line of that road is, it's skewed so that you don't park on that side. It allows for more space to be parking on the north side of Central, and then there's the sidewalk. So the proposal would be to allow day parking in that small section of Central Avenue along the sidewalk, and take off the 2-hour.
You mean daytime tag parking for
Daytime tag parking.
So, okay, so here's what I learned. We have daytime parking permits, but they're for the lots only. They are not really for parking on the streets. And it's something that I think we should consider in the future, is if we wanted to designate that as a parking permit for daytime, that we could start designating some of our areas for on-street parking for the day. But we don't have that right now. We only have lot parking. So we're forcing people to get a permit and park in a lot where we really don't want them parking in the lot. We want them to park in the back areas here so that those lot parking spaces are available for customers. It's a strange.
Oh, no, that actually makes a lot of sense. Right now, can people park there
Yes.
indefinitely or for just 2 hours?
2 hours.
So you're saying take away the 2
Either
hours?
side.
I don't see any lines. Are there no lines there?
There's no lines there
It
right
just
now.
starts down here, but it's, there's no
Well,
lines.
Paul, I don't know. Did you say there was lines or not? I don't think there's lines there.
There are no lines, right? Or there used to be, or, oh.
I believe there's only lines for the train station parking and the meter parking, is that correct? The very top and the very bottom.
Okay, so how many spots do you think that is?
I didn't measure it, so I don't know. That would be but I'm proposing that we allow people to park there, not in the customer area up north, and not in the train station up south, but just in that little area, just to try to get a few of those cars off of the Main Street area. Just a thought. But we would have Paul stripe them.
Well, regardless, they should be, the parking spots should be marked.
Right.
Otherwise, we have a different kind of problem of people just mushing in, but yeah. Were you gonna say something?
Would it make sense to continue the 2-hour parking on that portion of the street? I'm just thinking, like, you know, who's actually parking there, and how far are they actually walking? Because you're really in the back of buildings at that point.
Right,
When-
which is why, to me, it made sense that we put employees back there, and then not have to have them running around all the time and taking up customer spots.
It's just a question.
I don't know.
Is there any?
I wasn't aware we were talking about the north side of Central. That wasn't in the discussions we had before. But on the south side of Central, those spots, essentially what it is the Steamer Firehouse has an extremely steep driveway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only is it difficult to navigate, but it doesn't allow for a lot of parking inside of it. So anytime you have meeting night, you have an event at the firehouse, or more importantly, you have an emergency response, people will tend to park on that south side right along the curb line there. And it's never been a problem. We don't have, I mean, we've had one significant accident on Central Avenue, and it wasn't the result of any cars parked on the street, and it was probably 10 or 12 years ago. There's 1 or 2 people that park on the other side of Central Avenue for brief periods of time early in the morning when they come there to stop and check on some things. Other than that, we don't usually see people parked on the other side of the street. I'll tell you this, if you can convince employees from Main Street to park on Central Avenue, then good for whoever convinces them to do that, because we can't get them to park anywhere except for directly in front of their door, even with tickets. So,
Yeah.
Right.
so
That's
it's
the problem.
it points to the bigger issue that we need to have some conversation with the businesses about the entire culture of parking in downtown Austin, and how the lots are used and how the meters are used and where people are allowed to park and how we can benefit them, because I think what the fact that people are parking directly in front of their door, I think what it says is that they haven't found the value in parking somewhere else yet, and that they see more value in the convenience for themselves of parking right there. So I think that there's a larger conversation than just creating 3 parking spots or 4 or 5 or 6 parking spots on Central Avenue for them. But
That is so steep that on a nice rainy day or sleety day, the odds of anybody walking from there.
and the other thing is that they really, most of them, but for maybe Rim Plumbing, don't really access their properties from Central Avenue. They access them from Main Street. So in order to park there, you would have to go all the way around, which, again, people are interested in convenience these days. My ask would be to absolutely not take away the parking from the firemen. That is, I spoke to some people from the Steamer Firehouse. That is a critical piece of their operation there, and they really need those parking spots.
Now, are we talking about changing the spots that are most frequently used by Steamer? Is that what's being proposed, or is it just the south side that's the Steamer?
No, they use the south side.
I very rarely, if ever, have seen anybody park on the north side of the street.
Right, I haven't either, but I also have spoken to a number of business owners who say, oh, well, I just couldn't get a spot in the day lot today, so I'm moving my car every 3 hours. And you know what? I'd like to be able to say, well, have you seen if the 4 spots on North Central have been used? Because that's right around the corner, and you could park there once and not go out in the middle of your day and have to move your car to avoid a ticket.
The only concern is that if you park on both sides of the street, that does narrow that section.
Right, but there's
considerably.
parking allowed there now. It's just nobody does.
Right.
White Street too. I mean,
Right. So if the businesses are gone during the day and Steamer's having their night meetings at night, can't they just park on the other side?
Until there's a fire. I mean, I don't see the need to adjust what the firehouse does right now. They haven't caused a problem anywhere. Moving
No,
them
but I
somewhere.
think Debbie's point is that, let's say that an emergency, I totally get that we should impede them parking on the south side. I totally get that. They've been doing that for decades. I get it. But for like programming and events and other stuff, they could park on Main or in a lot, or I mean, part of this whole conversation, no matter what we do, especially when it comes to our business owners, is no one wants a change of culture because they all had their exact reasons. But it's gonna, no matter what we do, incrementally, even before we go to our whole parking analysis and overall parking, what is it called, guys? I'm losing the strategy that's being done soon, is to strategically implement these changes to change the culture, right? So back to Victoria's point, asking that question, hey, have you checked on Central? Yes, you're going to have a lot of people that prefer to get 20 tickets a day, right? So that's an enforcement then and a court issue, and that has to be addressed. I know you spoke to the chamber, and I'm assuming we're going to continue having a conversation with them and how to better reach them. So regardless of how it's done, it's still going to be a challenge to make sure we're on the same page and how to address it.
Right, so I've actually been walking, I started at the top of Main Street, and I've met with every single business until I got to Vaza, and then I stopped at Vaza. And there were some recommendations that maybe the lot across the street where Market Square is, that become all permit parking. There's, I think, 5 spots is what we saw, Stuart. And then the rest was 3-hour turnover parking. I think I would prefer that we try to find spaces behind the buildings where they can park. But a lot of them were excited about the opportunity to just be able to park their car and not have to run out to it every 2 hours or 3 hours to move it.
So I guess because I want to make sure I was clear about my question, I was referencing the meter where the meters are in this section of Central. Yeah, the top of the hill.
The top of the
Would
hill.
would it make sense just to make that daytime parking? Would that interfere with the firehouse, just from going from
No,
meter to daytime parking?
No, the meters don't necessarily have anything to do with the firehouse. But what they do is it provides a couple of short-term parking spaces, either for people going to the salon, although it's on the back side of it, they're still at that corner. It's if you want to run across the deli, if you are going into the upholstery place, or even if you're going to Jeter's and I wish there still was ice cream on Central Avenue, but there isn't anymore. But, you know, if any of those businesses open and you turn it into daytime parking, you now eliminate any opportunity for those businesses to have
Yeah.
those meter parking. And I think the idea is that,
You
you know,
need a turn.
ultimately, look, the big fix here is when we take the businesses and we give them a functional place to park long-term during the day.
Yep.
And I don't think that's going to be solved by saying, 2 of you go over here, 4 of you go over there. I think there's some bigger issues here where we can say long-term, all right, all of you go over this way. And we're never going to get everybody, right? And there's always going to be some other small things we can do. But we know right now that on Ellis Place, you can park there without penalty all day long. You can go to Eastern Avenue and cross the street. And they're not necessarily far, but they're inconvenient. So so that's sort of my point to this whole thing is before we go and we start saying, all right, you guys move over here and you move over there for the sake of 4 or 5 parking spots, I think there's moves we can make that we can be touching 50 and 100 at a time rather than moving 4 and 5.
Yeah, but that's long-term down the road.
I hear what you're saying, but I think what the manager was trying to figure out is right now it's 2-hour parking way down in the middle of Central Avenue, which is, it might as well say no parking. And you're kind of saying, yeah, the fire department would prefer there be no parking because if they have to come in for an emergency at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when there might be employees from the businesses parked there, it would be a problem if there was parking on both sides of the street. Is that what you're saying?
You know, I got to be honest. I think that we should hear from the Steamer Fire Company as far as, or the fire chiefs, as far as what their needs are on that block. I can't speak for everything that they need. The only thing I knew we were speaking about today was the south side of Central, adjacent to the firehouse. And in terms of that, my ask was not to remove it. As far as what goes on the other side of the street, I hadn't really considered it because it wasn't in our conversation until now.
Because what I'm hearing is we're not changing where people are allowed to park on either side of the street. It's just one section of Central Avenue, which is just not utilized at all. Because nobody's going to park that far down Central Avenue to spend 2 hours at a business because fortunately they don't need to because we don't really have the parking problem people talk about. What we do have a shortage of is all-day parking. And so what I think the manager's trying to suggest is parking's allowed there right now. It might as well not even be allowed. But if we made it all-day parking, then maybe a few people who are tired of getting tickets would park there when they're at work. But what you're suggesting is we should talk to Steamer and see, is that really a problem having, because if we're going to encourage people to park someplace where de facto it's not being used as parking, is that creating a problem for Steamer?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're the folks that touch that the most.
Okay.
And I think they would have the most knowledge.
So then, Debbie, I'd like to hear from Steamer before we move forward with at least that part of the proposal.
So the last area that Stuart and I looked at, it's Market Square. There's 2 areas. So Market Square, I briefly alluded to the fact that, you know, there was discussion about this parking area. So if you look at up on the top of the hill, which is on the bottom right-hand corner, there's a truck there. And I know that's the access to get into the Verizon building. There is an opportunity up there to clean that up. That's our property. We own that. And we could talk to Verizon about how often they access their building and what their needs are and perhaps create some additional permit parking up in that area.
I did not know we own that.
Yes. So, you know, we looked at all of that as being permit, and I'm not sure that I really like that because I do like the turnover, and I think that the businesses up in that area would like that turnover parking as well. But there is some, potentially, some additional spots that.
narrow, right? It's like a real.
Well, it's actually quite large. It looks narrow, but if you patch the
Yeah, how do you get
the
it now?
pavement, you go up the driveway.
I know, but I've been up that driveway. I
Yeah.
can't.
So,
And then you can park, and then there's plenty of room to back up and pull out.
Paul, can you speak about access and how that will work in our parking lot if we decide to put additional parking spaces in there, please?
Well, the only access is where it is now, which is just north of the bank there. It runs parallel to the bank teller window. Once you get past the parking area, it's a pretty steep hill, and it's fairly narrow. I don't know if the picture is a little skewed there, but it really doesn't reflect that. The other the other concern we might have is there, there might be a couple of spots we can put up there, but, ultimately, I don't even really know who plows up there in the winter and maintains that area. I believe it's Verizon. I don't think Recreation goes up there and plows. They're not big Verizon trucks, but they are still trucks, and there's some movement around there. But it could be possible to put a couple of spots on the top of the hill. I would shy away from saying along the hill on the way up to the platform area over there.
So those two trucks in this picture right now, so I understand the access for the business, but is parking on our property, is that, so they're just allowed to park there on public property with no?
I think it's something that just happens because those blue lines don't exist in the
Yeah.
field, and there's nothing really there that states that they can't, that I know of.
Huh?
There's no signs there in this field to identify it as a public versus access to their building in the back.
But a posted word that says owned by the Village of Ossining and then call OPD?
Well, if that's the board,
No, I think there's,
I don't know, or I'm just saying, like, no, if we own it, and
Right.
for whatever reason, we just don't maintain it or don't plow it, but it's our property, and whatever we choose to do with our property, whether it's parking or whatever, there's access to it. It's needed for a business, which is clear. I just want to know, I don't really care the who, but clearly it's not just about access, it's about allowing parking for a private business on public property. So that's all. It's just a question.
Oh, but if you put up
There-
like 2-hour parking, they can run out every 2 hours and
I mean, they have,
park there too, just like anybody else could.
I don't
they have
believe they're,
access to their building through there,
I-
and they,
yeah,
But access is different than parking.
Correct.
yeah.
and,
And again, I think it's just that we need to talk to
Yeah.
Verizon just to find out. I'm trying to eke out a couple of spaces here and there to see, where we
supportive.
can get a little bit extra, but it's just a thought.
I've never seen personal vehicles there. I have seen Verizon vehicles on the top of the hill. I think if we're really going to consider it, we should also research property records to see if they might have an easement on our parcel to
Yeah.
maybe even have vehicles there for one
Right.
reason or another. So there might be things that exist that we don't
But
have at
even
the
if you
table
could
right now.
do spots there, because of the turn, how many spots could you realistically put there?
I counted 5.
You counted 5, wow.
Counted 5 with the minimum requirements for parking and turnaround and everything else.
And the trucks being able-
Yeah, because there's plenty of room to turn around, because you would park all 5 of them just the way those 2 are parked there. And then there's plenty of room to back up and pull out.
My 5 spots is something to, it's not something to ignore, and it would make sense if it were like all-day employee parking, and that's reasonably convenient. The question would then be, though, if we haven't maintained it in all of these years, are we looking to maintain more parking spots and more hills?
We own it.
I understand we own it, but the reality is, but like my next door neighbor, if he keeps shoveling the sidewalk up to this point, then he kind of owns it, even though I own it according to
Yeah,
the survey,
well,
you
that's,
know?
Right.
Do we really want to add to our list of things of what we're adding to our responsibilities in a not very convenient location? That's one of the considerations.
I understand.
Just for clarification, I don't know how I stated it the first time. I was not certain who maintains it. I didn't
Right.
mean to say that we did or we didn't. I just know that I know
I
that
think
Recreation takes care of the Market Square lot. I don't know if the plow makes its way up that hill and what the interface is with the Verizon portion.
So I think for me, the essential and the key part was something that Paul did mention before, is like, what kind of legal document is between Verizon and ourselves? Do we have anything? Is there anything legal that can hold us up to try to do anything? That to me is the first step to figure it out, if we can actually utilize
Right.
any parking spaces up in that area. So my suggestion will be something additional to Stewart.
I have to just look at Verizon's
Correct.
deed. Verizon's
Right.
deed will reflect that there's an easement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's nothing,
that's
if it's
easy.
nothing in there, then will be another conversation with any representative from Verizon, and then move from there. Be like, look, this is what we're gonna be proposing to the board, and the board will decide if we're gonna put additional parking spaces in there and move from there. But I
That
think
makes
that,
sense.
correct.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, I think the first step was first just identifying prospective spots, right? So, and
I
that,
agree.
Yeah.
and that was done here. And, I mean, at this point, until we reach a master plan for parking, I know it sounds very piecemeal, but even if at the end of the day, we find out that we're able to do it and only 3 can fit up there, that's 3 spots, so, that's progress, and if we can do it, so.
Go to the Google Maps, please. Okay, so this is the last area. This is Secor Road, Main Street. So up where you see Gem Fitness Systems, we weren't sure. Kevin was telling me that a lot of people park there, especially like business people and some of the residents there. I wasn't sure. It's 2-hour parking up there right now. I drove by only on one day and there was like nobody parked there. And then if you look at Secor Road, down where it actually says Secor Road, there's train station parking for a part of that hill, and then it's 2-hour parking the rest of that hill. And I wasn't sure if we should consider a different strategy. So there are several businesses down at the lower end where Depot Plaza comes into Secor. We would want to make sure that there's enough transient spots for the deli, the dry cleaner, things like that. But it just seemed, and I'm not really proposing anything right now, I'm just sort of bringing it to your attention that it seems like that could be another area that we actually look at to try to do something different there. Either create more train station parking, overnight parking for the residents, and I don't have that fully developed in my mind yet. It's just sort of, as we were driving around, said, I wonder what's going on here. Do any of you have any thoughts on that?
Were you referencing right here on Main Street where Gym Fitness is, like one of the steepest hills?
Well,
In
Jeff is really
Ossining?
down
Yeah,
there,
because
but-
there's
Okay.
2-hour parking there, and you can see some cars in the picture. It just seemed like there wasn't a lot of parking there.
So the issue with 2-hour parking versus train station parking is this: there's not a good way to lawfully create parking that says this is for the residents that live on this street, right? You can't create a sign that says you can only park here if you live here. That's not possible. If you create permit parking for the train station on Secor Road, that certainly would please lots of people heading down to the train. Unfortunately, all of those houses that are along there would have no place to park. So the best way to illustrate this is to look at the very beginning of Hunter Street. So I don't remember how far down it goes, but not very far in the beginning of Secor Road, there's a section there that's marked as 2-hour parking only. And the purpose of that having been put in was because the residents of those houses that don't have driveways, there was no other way to take that and say, and take that away from both the overcrowding that comes from the staff at Sing Sing as well as the train station people. So one way or another, you have people that want to park all day long. The only way to avoid both of those situations is to make it 2-hour parking, and then the residents can kind of come and go. It's a similar situation in those other places. I spoke to some of the businesses down on Water Street and Secor, and one of their concerns is that even though they would have the option to purchase a train station tag, a lot of them say that for the employees that come down there, it would be cost prohibitive for them. So generally what they do is they park 2 hours at a time, and a lot of them are coming and going on tasks, so they're not there all day long. Residents that live there will move their car periodically if they're home during the day, as opposed, and perhaps they work at night or they're just home. The 2-hour parking is not a good solution, but it's the one we use in order to allow people to park there. What I've heard from the folks in that area is that if you took that parking away and gave it to the train station people, they would have nowhere to go. Specifically, the dry cleaner and the deli, from what I hear from parking enforcement, if we were to take the parking away from them, they would have nowhere left for their customers to go, and essentially those businesses would dry up. Water Street tends to be taken on that small section of Water Street between Secor and Main. That tends to be taken by residents. Those are mostly multi-dwellings over there. And then you have some people from the businesses. So it's a very difficult area. It's a little bit tight there. That is a one-way, that portion. And there's all curb cuts on the left side of the street there as you're taking the one-way. So it's a really limited area for parking. And that 2 hours is really important to the residents and businesses in that area.
Right, in the parking lot that's there where it says Baker Funeral Home. So the parking spots to the right are train station parking, and the parking spots to the left are resident parking. So it's split. I think this might be another area, though, where we could sign it better so that people that are going down to the businesses, that are more long-term businesses, perhaps could direct their visitors to park in those areas. Again, it's kind of far away. And that's one of the things that they shared with me, is they have a lot of people that are coming, like Riverkeeper has a lot of people coming. So they buy 10 parking spots for their employees to park in train station parking, wherever they can get that. But then if you go down to visit them, where do you park? There's nowhere to park. Several of the businesses down there have said that to me. So, you know, do we make them climb up the hill to park for 2 hours, or do we make that train station and then have another area where it's train station but closer to the businesses and make that more for visitors of the businesses? I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing out an idea.
I'm thinking out loud as well. Do you think that, so right now, you said that that lot is, you know, half 2 hour and the rest train station, so it's
Correct.
a multi-use lot.
Right.
Is there a way to make the entire lot 2 hours and sign it? I'm thinking about how to make it more user-friendly, and then maybe, let's say, I'm making this up, let's say there's 8 spots for the train station, put those on the hill and assign those. I'm thinking out loud here, I don't know.
think it's, and I know exactly where you're going, but I just think this is a bigger
so scattered,
conversation
you know? Oh, yeah, no,
right
of
now.
course, yeah.
That, you know, we're not, I've been hearing about train station parking spaces for the past 3 years, and I was involved in a couple of meetings and tried to figure that out. And I think it's just a lot deeper than that, and definitely not tonight. You know, we are going to be looking in a bigger picture pretty soon, I hope. And that's what I think we will have the opportunity. I mean, a lot of the stuff that the chief came, you know, he's definitely more aware than a lot of us here in the room, and what that means in regards to enforcement, in regards to relationships with the businesses, that we want them to have that access, and obviously the residents as well. So if you zoom out going to Water Street, right next to the intersection on Central Ave, there's, you know, if we're going to be talking about additional parking lots, there's an empty parking lot right there. It's privately owned. Correct. No. Keep
Up
going. No,
further?
the other one.
Up further.
Keep going. Right there with the.
Right.
So that, I only see 1, 2 cars maybe, if anything. I
I don't know who owns it right now. It was a race shop years ago. I believe that was purchased by Croton Home Center, because I think they have inventory stored inside there. I could be wrong.
I don't think that, regardless, I mean,
Right.
but, you know, even if that's the case, that could be, if we're talking about parking spaces, if we're talking about, you know, additional spaces when, that we can work with someone, that's another possibility, and start making it, you know, little movements here and there, that we can get,
Yeah,
I don't know
mean,
how many spots,
That's,
so.
that's part of the conversation, but I mean,
Correct.
that's an additional component, because now we're
Yes.
talking about private property, obtaining private property. I mean,
And I agree, but again, then, but I don't want to, I want to look at it as a bigger picture, so I want to look at it as a bigger solution than just patching things here and there, which we may have to undo them, you know, within the next couple months, and makes no sense, because now we're driving, you know, people feel like, but wait, I was allowed to park here, and now I'm not.
Is this
Yeah,
the last-
and-
is this the last of the streets we're looking at?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so it seems like the first 2 were sort of
Yes.
very additional spots, nice solutions, everybody was
Right.
nodding their head like, we don't have it really well designed today, it's easy to design, people will be happy, not much of a downside. Then we moved into 2 spots here, 3 spots there, if we move this, that starts being a whole different, like, do you do that at this point? It seems to me the first 2, we could probably decide if we're all in agreement, the other ones I think has to be more of a, you know,
Yes.
a larger plan,
I
little
agree
more
w-
information, but I mean, it's not like a yes, no, it could be the first 2, we could definitely go forward maybe, and the other ones, we need a little bit more thinking, maybe, you know, I can revisit, see what's, you know, like maybe.
Yeah,
some ideas.
so the first 2 is Academy and St. Paul's, if we just could confirm that, you know, in writing, that we all heard the same thing, and then Debbie can move those forward as manager. You know, what are you proposing to change, but I think we all came to a conclusion on that. The other one that was close, we just need to reach out to Steamer and make sure that we're
Right,
not going to
Central is
undermine their ability to respond to emergencies, particularly, I mean, most of their events and stuff are in the evenings and weekends, so that's less of a, no? But anyway,
I
we'll
mean,
talk to
that's the
Steamer.
common conception. I think
We'll
you should
get
hear
their
from them. I
input.
don't wanna
We will-
speak on their
we will
behalf,
hear
yeah.
We will hear from Steamer before we consider how to move forward on Central. And then these others are things that'll be discussed in the strategic analysis.
I concur. I do, though, am very curious and want to learn about the whole Verizon public property.
Understood.
Yes.
Area thing. Just
Sounds
in
good.
I'll look
general
into
for-
that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sure.
because that could be a
Please,
quick
just,
grab for
yeah.
some additional spaces, sure,
It's hours, you know?
right. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm all done. All done. Thank you, sorry. I might have been talking down.
Okay.
Are we done with the screen for tonight?
I believe so.
I think so.
Bad background.
We don't have a seal on that
I really
wall.
don't want these lights on. Can we shut these off, or is that like, is that a problem for him again? They're going, okay.
We could have, but we have to decide before we go on camera. Alrighty. So, Madam Manager, where are we
Okay,
at here?
so the next agenda item is the capital projects. Tom Warren, our village treasurer, is here to talk about some additional capital projects we'd like to move forward.
Excellent. Welcome. Treasurer Warren.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees.
Tom, do you want to sit at the table, or?
Tom,
I hope
He likes
that I'm not going to be here very
Okay.
long.
He wants to stay close to the door.
I don't know.
I like the plan, Tom.
But go for it, please.
Well,
Help us-
well,
help us
well.
do that.
Yeah, nice one.
We've had a few requests for some things that are going on in 2019 so that things can continue to be done. And we actually need budget appropriations to accomplish these. For the capital projects, Paul is actually working off of a carryover purchase order from last year for street paving. We had put in the capital plan a budget. We haven't acted on it yet to establish the appropriations yet for 2019. So I prepared a resolution to establish the capital project for 2019 comprehensive street and curb maintenance of $480,000 at this time. In the capital plan, there was another $50,000 for sidewalk assessments, which will adjust later in the year based on the actual sidewalk assessments that are actually put in. So that, and the second one was to establish a capital project for the basketball court resurfacing, which is to be financed by monies from the developers in lieu of Parkland's funds account in the amount of $220,000. And I actually did want to go back to the street and curb work. Of the $480,000, $230,000 was from CHIP state aid. And in the capital plan, initially we had thought that the $250,000 would come from issuance of debt, but because it's already April, and to pass a bond resolution will just delay the ability to actually start spending the money. And given the healthy fund balance that we have at the end of 2017 and anticipated for 2018, the recommendation is to utilize fund balance instead of issuing more debt for the village for that purpose. Was there any questions or comments before I move on to the next item?
My only question would be, I mean, when we do a 0% tax rate increase, you know, one of the concerns is that we're chipping away at our fund balance. If this wasn't anticipated to be drawing down on our fund balance, are we chipping away a little faster than we even anticipated by doing a 0% tax rate increase?
We had made estimates of where we thought the 2018 operations would be during our budget work sessions. I haven't seen anything that's going to change things. There's a significant amount of excess revenues last year from like sales tax and mortgage tax, departmental income, and there's also a significant amount of unexpended appropriations because of unfilled positions. So there's a very large infusion of cash into fund balance. I view it as, a good way to utilize that money, and it's only $250,000. And as I said, timing-wise, to ask for a bond resolution would just delay the ability to do additional street paving work until, at
Certainly
least
do not want to delay street paving. I'm fine with going along with your recommendation. My concern is simply that when we plan for the 2019 budget, if this amount of money was anticipated to be borrowed as a bond, and now it's not, and we're drawing down on fund balance, I know we are concerned about, even though we have a very healthy fund balance, and that's what allows us to, again, have a 0% tax rate increase, we do have to be mindful of the fact that we didn't raise our taxes this year because we thought we had a healthy balance, so chipping away a little faster. I'm just a little nervous, but I will go along with your recommendation, but
So
note
I
my
just
concern.
I just want to say, Tom, if I
I
heard you
get that.
if I heard you correctly, because given the amount of unfilled positions, right, that each year we have had a little extra in the kitty. Now I would imagine that at the moment that the village actually fills every position, then that would be the time where we would be, then that would be the time where one should be actually concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
I would also support Tom's recommendation because knowing where we are with the audit and the money that's going back in, we hadn't anticipated that, so using it would be.
Great, because
okay.
you're one of the people who is most concerned about chipping away at the fund balance.
Yes,
So
I
if you're
am.
not concerned, then I'm not concerned. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Anybody else? No.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
nothing else?
else?
No, I wanted to talk about the
there's more.
the two $15,000 items.
Oh, that's right.
The
yes,
little ones.
yes. They're not on here,
In
but
her,
yes.
there was a separate memo submitted for that. Did
They're
that?
both linked.
I
Yeah.
did not see one.
They're both linked on the website.
Oh. I did not look.
Use of contingency funds for 2019 for unanticipated expenditures.
Right.
I heard about these from Debbie as part of her ongoing meetings with the department heads, and she asked me if we had monies in the budget, as well as asking the specific department heads if they had monies in the budget. One was $15,000 to replace the wooden Village of Ossining signs throughout the village. They're, I don't know, gosh, they must be at least 10 years old.
They were
and
Perillo.
They're, okay, even longer than that.
Yeah.
And they're in very tough
They
shape.
were Perillo.
Can I just
And-
very quickly, and we don't, and I'm not, this comment is not to impede progress on replacing those signs that have to be replaced, but I know that a lot of them were damaged by vehicles. And I don't know if insurance claims came through or but a lot of them were caused by accidents.
So the one that was, I believe, hit by, that says Police Department
Yeah.
on Highland Avenue, I don't know if we know who did that.
And
But that is one of the signs that needs to be
in the
replaced.
corner of Snowden, the very entrance
And the
off of
Snowden
9.
one as well.
Did you want to comment on that, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's, okay.
Paul is raising his hand.
Paul was raising his hand like a good student.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
I know. I know.
I don't know which one, but I could
for
say
municipality.
one of the signs and about 5 of the decorative street signs and then a couple of traffic signs, we recoup costs. Because when we do get a police report that's inclusive of insurance and there's a follow-up, that's what we do. We go out and we have a form letter that includes labor rate, cost of the sign for the materials, and the total. And whether it's done directly through the insurance company and Stewart's office, or it's done with the prosecutor as part of a bigger issue in the courts, we do recoup some of the costs. And I know one of the signs we recoup costs because you guys did make, I believe it was an arrest and, it went to court and that was part of the, that
Where
was
did the
part of
revenue go? What line items does the revenue hit when they get that money, whether it's insurance or?
We receive it, I believe, okay, you can answer that.
Oh, either one of you, I don't know.
Receivable, and yeah.
To what department?
We
Where
have a
does it
revenue
go?
called insurance or recoveries, and like if it's significant, sometimes we reappropriate that to pay for like repairs to a vehicle, like a village vehicle.
Okay.
I'm not aware specifically of these such amounts, but if they were received, they ended up in fund balance at the end of the year.
Okay, so a sign gets hit, one sign, actually, the person was caught, money's paid out from somewhere, it didn't go to actually fix the sign, it went into a bucket, into whatever GL code that you use for other things. So now if you need to fix the signs, the money comes from a separate bucket, not from the money that was paid to actually fix the signs, correct?
The monies that were received as part of these insurance payments, and, they are inclusive of,
Lots of stuff. You have to pick up the stuff that's broken, you have to fix whatever, the grass probably was damaged. No, I understand, I'm just trying to understand where it went. So we're taking 15,000 from a separate line.
the monies were received in prior years, recorded as an insurance or recovery revenue.
Okay.
And if they weren't specifically appropriated for a purpose, then they ended up in fund balance, and we're into a new fiscal year.
Okay.
And the money's sitting in fund balance.
Okay.
So now in 2019, that money's in fund balance. The recreation superintendent says he certainly doesn't have the money in his budget, $15,000, to pay for these signs. So the only choice that I really have now is to ask if that money can come from the contingency account in 2019.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Can I just clarify? Oh, it's just 3 of the wooden signs. We're not doing
They're
an
$5 grand each.
across-the-board change
Right,
and
no,
update, and we can
just the
take off
ones
the
that are
on
broken.
Hudson? Okay,
Yeah,
Right.
but that's actually what they call it.
that would have been my preference.
They're very expensive.
You want to redesign? Yeah.
No, that's what I thought they were doing, and I was like,
All right, this is just
That's
replacing
the
3 damaged
conversation.
signs. Okay, fine.
Right. But they're 15,000 apiece, right?
No.
That's
Oh, I thought
15,000
that they were $5,000 apiece
$5,000,
for
yeah.
$15,000.
That seems more reasonable.
Yeah, that sounds.
Even that's too.
I was like,
We are in the wrong business.
Expensive signs.
Come visit my new sign shop.
Right. Water brought that way.
All right.
And the other requests pertain to starting to do work on design for installation of a generator at Hollow Hose. That estimate is $15,000 from the outside engineering firm that we normally use for the generators to do the design work at this point. And the chief said that from his recollections when he was here talking to the board during the 2019 budget process, and the talk about the generators came up, he said that he was hoping that he would have unexpended monies from his 2018 budget to utilize for this purpose, but now that the books are closed, there was no excess monies left in the budget. It was fully expended for the fire department, so.
So, yeah, Debbie, it's 15,000 for design, but what
Correct.
are we looking at for a price tag for the
It's a
generator?
$250,000.
So the chief, and I'm not putting this on the chief, but I'm just saying, I'm not the police chief. The fire chiefs, as they were doing their budget, thought that they would have excess revenue, which is why they put it in their proposed budget for this year, but they used up the prospective revenue for this project. And so now we're having a discussion about, because I know it's a need, that we actually need this. So I know that, and I'm supportive of that, by the way.
I think that we had actually pushed it out to 2020.
Generators.
We're talking about a generator at Hollow Hose. Please chime in if you have anything to add.
So, I
I think that when we were talking about when we had the fire department in, talking about their budgets, we had talked about wanting to get generators in each of the village-owned properties so that when there's a power outage and there's an emergency, they can get those doors open and get the equipment out and get it back in. And I take responsibility for not following up on the capital plan because that's where it should be listed. 15,000 for the design and then the following year, the amount of money to actually buy the generator. So some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. I know I didn't pull this number.
Was it a 3-year capital project?
It was, because
Okay.
we were only gonna do one a year. Well, we pushed it to, in the final draft, it was pushed to 2020. In my mind, the design of it was going to be this year, and then 2020 was the
ready by
purchase.
2020, okay.
But the purchase wasn't in the budget, it was only, the design got pushed to 2020, so.
And just tell me,
If you
when it
wanna
comes
wait
to
till
a generator, what
that's fine.
exactly is a design?
Well, you have to spec the generator, you have to spec the place where it's going to
Are
be
there
located.
custom-built generators? Wow.
Yes.
Well, you just
Depends
put a
on-
generator in.
Depending on the load of the building, things like that.
Paul, could you come
Seriously? Wow.
and talk about what is the process when someone is doing a generator for a particular space, please?
And don't forget to mention,
Well, particularly the firehouse at Hull House. I mean, I don't want to learn. in
Well,
general.
there's 3 of them, right?
It's all the same,
They're all the same,
So
okay.
the process is the same.
it is.
I'm pretty certain Andy had worked on this with Chief DeCruz. He's done them for the other buildings, and he did the same thing here, although the generator is not custom, the generator proper. The, it has to be sized. You have to appropriate size generator for the load that it expects to shed or take on in a power outage. And then there's the other ancillary costs, like tying the generator into the automatic transfer switch goes into the panel and everything that goes along with it, including this civil site work necessary to set it somewhere on concrete, wherever it's going to go. And it has to be bid because it's going to be in excess of procurement that would dictate public bidding. So that requires bid documents, and that is why that's the proposal that I think Andy procured from Linstar, who's done all our other generators in the village,
Pretty
including,
much is the design service being provided by the electrical engineer
right,
for that particular space.
correct.
We're not customizing, again, a generator. We pretty much getting the
No,
design,
it's
the
the
electrical
concrete
part
and everything,
done for that specific.
And it's going to specify a generator or equal,
Right.
and then they're going to bid it, and that's it.
So I remember when there was an opportunity for the village to perhaps be part of a microgrid and blah, blah, blah. And actually, we were not good candidates because we were so well prepared as a municipal entity for emergencies and power outages. And that's great. I want to be over prepared because we have generators and we have, so can you remind me, we have one at the filter plant, which was recently replaced because we needed to, and that became clear after Superstorm Sandy, right? We have one at the community center, right?
It's easy to say where you don't have it. You don't have one here. Everywhere else you
We
have
have a mobile one though, right?
it. Here, we could here.
We could
Yeah.
here. And where does the mobile one live?
Up at the operations center, we have portable generators that would,
How many portable generators do we have at the op center?
I can't answer that.
And we have one at police court facility
Yes.
at Birdsall Fagan. Now, you have your own. We have a small. And believe me, that's an important place to have it. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have any generators where we do.
We have
We
it-
own,
we-
we have 9 fire companies, 7 firehouses. We own 5 of them.
We have them in all the necessary buildings, particularly for our OEM. We have them in fire headquarters, we have them in police headquarters, recreation center, which is our,
So what would
Shelter.
happen now if there's a power outage at a firehouse? They can't open their garage doors? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I would think they could manually open them, but they're very heavy. I don't know how they would do that. Because it's usually your driver that shows up and maybe 1 or 2 other people, but it's not like the whole company comes there when there's an emergency. They go to wherever the fire is or the rescue. So opening that is,
So what else does a generator, because if all we're talking about is opening a garage door, that's not $250,000.
correct.
So what else, what's costing us $250,000 that is necessary at the firehouse to have a generator?
Well, I think it would be most prudent just to get the design done, because then we would know what we would be looking at for the cost. It doesn't. It's been this many years without them, but we were hoping that we could do the design and then figure out how we could get
Just
it
to
installed.
clarify, all this was discussed or was part of the budget.
Right.
But we didn't have
I'm
any
just
idea of what the
trying to-
cost would be. It was like $30,000 was the, something like, and we knew it was ridiculously low. We didn't know it was 1/10 of the expense.
I just wanted to, because your understanding of all generators is pretty clear, but were you asking like that particular site, like why it's needed besides like a garage or like a?
I'm trying to understand, I'm happy for us to be the most prepared for storms and emergency situations of any municipality in the region. But I do want, it's a lot of money to spend on a generator for one of our 5 firehouses, and it's a good one to start with. I'm not questioning that. What I don't understand is the magnitude of what we are powering for a storm. I mean, and I have lived through days and days of blackouts. I understand it can really be a problem. I do not want our emergency responders to not be able to respond to something. So I want to make sure we have what we need, but $250,000 to open garage doors, I want to understand what else it's doing for $250,000 and why that's essential for our safety.
My understanding is, so if they're on standbys, whether it's the winter or the summer, a generator would also heat and AC the place. If you sleep there, that does happen when you're on standby.
Sure.
There's also, a lot of pieces of equipment that are charged there, especially in that particular firehouse, that are actually, always plugged in 24/7. It's kind of just I know from experience. I'm not the chief, so I can't speak for anything else, but that's just from what I knew.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
That's helpful. So if the design is, if the $15,000 is going to explain to us what the design would be accomplishing, all the bells and whistles and, then everything incremental in between that, I guess is what you're asking for $15,000 for. Would I get all of that information?
Why don't we table this to the next work session, and I'll get a lot more information and answer all your questions, and then you can make a decision.
Thanks.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
You said you had 2.
That was it.
That was it?
That was it.
Signs and generator design.
Oh, that was,
Right.
Those are the two, each of those are $15,000 items. Okay.
Okay.
Can we move on?
How about we go out of order, and we'll take Stuart and the towing and booting, because the chief is here to talk about that as well.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Welcome, Chief Sylvester, back to the table. Stuart, did you send us a draft on this? Because it's not linked.
I did not, because I actually sent something to the chief, but I would like to have a discussion with the board in terms of what we would like to talk to with regard to this, if I might. Currently, in the village, if you are a parking scofflaw, your vehicle cannot be towed, which is contrary to the law in most municipalities, in Westchester and throughout the state. In Ossining, a parking scofflaw is effectively defined as someone who has 4 or more unpaid tickets that total in fines at least $500. That's a fairly heavy number on both the number of tickets and the amount of fines. If you go to Tarrytown, it's 3 tickets without a monetary portion to it. Other municipalities have 3 tickets or $200. One of the reasons this has come up is Lieutenant Damiano had contacted me a while back because he wanted to see if we could revise Chapter 250, Article 7 to include that the vehicles can also be towed if they are parking scofflaws. So that instead of simply booting them, which is what is the provision currently in our code, we would have the ability to tow. And towing is in fact something that is, as I said, common in most places. Portchester, it's 3 or more outstanding and unpaid parking tickets, and a mailing to the owner basically saying that if you don't get your tickets paid, we're going to tow your car. What other places do is that if you've booted the car and the car is not moved after 72 hours, you tow the car. But I think what my suggestion to this board is that if you look at the idea of towing in addition to booting, what you would probably want to do is say, let's say it's just 3 tickets. Currently, what we have is that the police are to be provided by the Justice Court with a list of scofflaws. Those are the 4 plus, let's say, totaling $500. As I said, we can define scofflaw, in a particular way if we want to do it less. The Village of East Rockaway, I'm familiar with because that's where I grew up. Only 1 ticket, if you don't appear, makes you a scofflaw. What they do, Trustee Bazemore, it's if you're 60 days past your appearance date and you've not appeared, you're defined as a scofflaw. But other ones
That could be bad mail delivery with 1. But anyway, we're not suggesting that.
I'm not suggesting.
We're being much more generous.
But, for example, I think that if you were to simply say 3 tickets, and what you would ask is the Justice Court to then provide the police with a monthly list. Now, that would be the list that you could also use to boot, and you could also use to scofflaw. What Tarrytown, for example, Pleasantville does the same thing, is that you essentially give the police the option, which is either they can boot or they can tow. In most cases, you may see the boot used first, but in other cases, you may find it's necessary to tow right away. The issue, the more, if I may, somewhat more complicated issue is payment, because how do you deal with that? What a number of the municipalities require is that for the person to redeem their vehicle, they clearly must pay all the outstanding parking fees on the car. I should point out that Tarrytown and other municipalities require not only that you pay the fees on that car, but you pay on any other car that you as owner own and owe parking fees on in that village.
And owned.
Further, if your vehicle needs to be re-registered, you must pay for the registration. In Yonkers, in fact, if your vehicle is not registered or inspected, it can only be removed from a tow yard on a flatbed and taken to a private location. It cannot be put onto the street. I'm not saying to do that, I'm just pointing it out. But payment becomes the important thing. Generally, how it's worked out is that the person who wants to redeem their vehicle goes to the Justice Court and essentially says, how much do I owe you? And the way we have it now is it's sort of they pay it as a bond, because the person could still conceivably want to argue that they're not responsible for the tickets. So what they basically do is pay the maximum amount that they would owe on those tickets, sort of to bail their car out. And then the Justice Court provides documentation they can do that, and then there's an issue, they have to get the towing company paid, and there's usually an administrative fee that the municipality charges, generally $100, sometimes as high as $250.
What is that fee for?
The administrative fee, in many cases, it's for when the booting is done. It's just sort of, if you want to call it a quote, booting fee, which a lot of these places do. They also have a fee, for example, if you tamper with the boot.
That makes sense.
But in almost every municipality, they have a fee just for basically doing what has to be, because there's paperwork involved in actually having to redeem your car. You're gonna, and this is not just the paperwork from the Justice Court end, it's the paperwork from the police end, because what ordinarily happens is they're gonna have to notify you, for example, where your car is and how much is owed and all those different things. So that's where we get into the towing end. So,
Can I ask, what is the purpose of, first of all, how many booths do we have? Like, what's the booting?
Glad you asked.
Okay,
I'm
so
asking because I know the answer, but but I just want to hear it so I can laugh again.
I would prefer if we just stopped talking about boots now.
Yeah, so would I, because
Look,
when you
I
tell
think
the public how many
I
we
think it's
have,
not
it'll be
bad to
funny.
have in the code that we have the option. I mean, always leaving us with more options is good, because if we changed our mind down the road to say we want to start using boots, then we wouldn't have to go back and amend the code. So to say boot or tow is probably the best way to do this. The only way right now that I would intend to do this would be by tow trucks. Booting is difficult. They're large, they're heavy. You need
Damages
a large
cars.
vehicle. In many cases, they drive around with them on a flatbed because you'd
Yeah.
have to take out 20 or 30 of them at a time. If you saw our scofflaw list, it's extensive. So if you're going to go out and address this, you'd need a lot of boots to go out and find those vehicles if you're going to do it. Typically, what other city I know like City of Peekskill and some other places do is they'll pick one night where they say it's scofflaw night, and they have an operation where they go out and they look for scofflaws. It's not necessarily just every vehicle you come across as it's parked on the street doing overnight parking, although that is an option. So towing would be our preference. Some of the complications to this. So clearing your fines first, that's a common practice in just about everything that you would do in the court. So for instance, those people who are either brought in for driving with a suspended license or with a suspended registration, typically their first action would be to clear the underlying suspension so that when they come back to court, otherwise the court typically sends them out and says, clear your suspension, come back to us, show us you've done that. So clearing it first is always the first hurdle. With regard to unregistered vehicles, that's the practice right now. If the vehicle's unregistered, it's not allowed to be on the road. So if your car was towed for being unregistered in any case, you would have to go and fix the registration, then you can come back and pick up the vehicle. The big challenge for us here is that, and Stuart's sort of gone over everything up to the last point, and what we've been discussing is that when it comes to payment, if you have to pay fines to the court, you have to do that at the court. And then if you have an administrative fee, you would pay that, if in fact we chose to use that, you would pay that to the village, presumably at the police station when you get your release form. And then if you had to pay the tow fee, that would be at the tow yard. So what we've been talking about today is just that I think it's a little bit unruly to have people paying in all these different locations. So we're looking for ways that we can sort of streamline that. One of the options, and we just started kicking this around earlier today, yesterday, is that we may be able to find a way where, and this would go back to the conversation we had about tow trucks in the past and overhauling the entire system, is that there may be a system where we can collect the tow fee at time of release and then essentially voucher off those operations to the tow truck. So we already have a fee schedule in place. Number one, what it would do is it would really create a bit of accountability for how much the tow trucks are charging because the money would be collected by us. And essentially what we would do is then just voucher it off and they would take payment on their tows for the week or every 2 weeks when those vouchers go through. So I think that one of the things in order to make this efficient, really, we need to figure out where that money's going. We don't have the option to collect for the court. I suspect that the court's going to tell us that they can't collect on our behalf, so I don't think one-stop shopping is an option. But even right now for vehicle and traffic tickets, if we have your car, you still have to go to the court and pay them first and then bring your receipt back to show that whatever's been cleared before you can take that car, if in fact that's the reason for it being taken.
And how many people are currently on that list?
It's extensive. I don't know off the top of my head, but
I haven't seen the most recent scofflaw list.
Database.
What?
Do we create a database for people to actually know?
That's a good.
well, so in many locations,
The town court's obligated to provide to the police on a monthly basis.
and when you do in other municipalities, from what I've seen, when your car is listed as a scofflaw, you typically get a letter in the mail. And most of those letters say that once your car, if they tow those cars, they'll tell you in that letter at what point that your vehicle is subject to being towed if it's found within city limits, village limits, things like that. So look, forewarning is always a good thing. I mean, I think we should be sending something out to let people know, look, you're now subject to tow, we're coming to get your car. But, we've talked for a while now about recovery of revenue, and I think there's a lot hanging out there. Some of the other things that we discussed in preparation for this is that 4 tickets and $500 is sort of it's not really it's not an objective standard because each person's ticket is for a different amount, and it may take longer for somebody, say, with meters on Main Street to reach that $500 limit. They could be hanging out with tickets forever, where overnight tickets may go faster or some other type of summons. I would prefer in this one if we could do it by number of tickets and then a time frame. So if you don't answer 2 or 3 tickets and you have however many days, weeks, months, whatever we set out there, that would be the standard rather than saying a monetary number because those are adjusted by the court.
This is a very complex conversation.
It certainly is.
Because when you initially started, listen, I don't drive as often as I used to, right? And so, and everybody knows my stance when it comes to people paying for parking. But when you start talking about ticketing, Austin is one of the most inconvenient places to pay a ticket, right? And so I would hate for someone, because some people, for whatever reason or another, you know, if you had a ticket in 1999, and then as soon as this law comes in, you know,
That's already been thrown out.
Well,
Yeah.
It's already
yeah,
been,
right.
it's already been expunged.
those have been
Any-
expunged,
there's
but not
nothing
only,
that-
but not
there's
only
nothing
that, but I
will-
mean, look, I think anytime you put a new law on the books, especially something where there's going to be drastic measures like taking people's cars from them, I think you have to trust that the process of implementation is going to be something where there's a lot of conversation about it, there's a lot of warning about it. We go out and work with people. I mean, when a new law comes on the books for something, you know, any new law, if we put a new stop sign somewhere, we don't just go out and start dropping tickets on everybody the first day. There's an education period that comes with that. So I think that you have to give people an opportunity to get up to speed with it. And
But
it's
if you
not.
take my car for $60, like for 4 parking tickets on Main Street, like that's like my whole car. And
What do you want them
I
to do,
think-
take your tire?
I mean, well, I think, and I think that's the conversation to have with the Board of Trustees, is at what point do you value, you know, we sit and we look at the list as a whole and we say, okay, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue that's uncollected. Is our value in collecting that revenue, or is our value in not taking people's cars?
Well,
And-
how
and
about
that's-
Actually,
how about
I-
looking at it a little differently? How is this fair to the people who pay everything on time, and the people who follow the laws, and the people who get tickets and schlep down and negotiate their whatever they negotiate? We have over 100 people a night, 125 on the average now. All those people found the time, figured out how to get their money. I've sat there in that courtroom more than 3 times in the past 3 months. It is, to me, insulting and abrasive and unfair to the people who follow the rules and pay their bills. And by the way, Ossining uncomfortable? Try living in Mamaroneck for a while and see what they do to you. And New Rochelle ain't a pretty sight. We are not the most difficult place. The same thing with the stores and the people who work there, because I worked in Mamaroneck. Impossible with the parking. You get ticketed right away. They tow you right away. I even got a ticket while I went to pay a ticket in New Rochelle. It was a beautiful experience. While paying a ticket, I got ticketed. And, you know, so people don't just drive in Ossining. So they're very much aware that when they do things, I think that laws are not just designed for the lawbreakers, they're also designed for people who follow the law, and this is not fair. The question for me right now is, yeah, if you don't pay your tickets and you've got more than 4 of them, yeah, that's not really okay, and it's not okay for all the hundreds of people who do pay it. It's sort of like when you're in school, you know, like if everybody's cheating, you're like the idiot who didn't cheat. It's not right. It's a totally the backwards way of looking at it. I do think, though, that there has to be a balance of number and dollars, not just number. So, and figure that out. From my perspective, speaking for myself only, there has to be a balance of, you know, an appropriateness. But people who, you know, I mean, like I went the other night, and there's a person who walks in there. Not only does everybody know the person by first name, they're like, you know, they accumulate all the tickets, they negotiate them in bulk. I felt like I was on the trading floor with this guy. It's ridiculous. Meanwhile, you see a woman with a child who's like paying the ticket, who's like showing up there, like with the kid to do the right thing. I think we do have to do this, and I think there's probably more than 50 people on that list.
I texted the
I
lieutenant
mean, we
to
should
see
have
if he's
that
paying
information.
attention, but
I mean, I'd like to
I'll see if
get
he
some
gets
sort
back
of
to me.
proportion of this and how far back it goes, and but we have to come up with a number. It's like, what's the X and Y on this?
Just so you're aware.
Yeah, no,
don't wanna cut you off, so-
I'm turning to you because I see that you're getting ready to
Thanks.
say something.
I get that. This is not about me agreeing or not. I just because you brought up some pretty good points. Because I have been in court to just observe a lot, and I have observed people who, as well, gather it up. They kind of negotiate, as you say. But I've also observed the people who pay them negotiate as well with our prosecutor. So everyone's negotiating in Ossining, right, and in our court. I'm more concerned about. We have a lot of administrative fees, and it's not unique to Ossining. It's in a lot of municipalities. This is not a criticism to the police or village at all, but it's already within their job and in the department to do this function. So I don't really see why an administrative fee is needed. and maybe I'm just wrong because I'm not understanding it correctly. It may just be me. I'm more I kind of just want to learn more about, like, is this more about just, you know what, Trustee Rivera, we just want more options because right now we feel that it's more efficient with our time to get a car towed, depending on the circumstance, and or sometimes to get it booted, because that'll kind of get, like, if I had something, to actually see why the choice is necessary. Is it a time thing? Is it a manpower thing?
So
Is it-
looking at the,
What about
I
the
have,
administrative fee above and beyond?
yeah.
That's what your
I
issue
don't have
is.
I don't have strong feelings on that, but with regard to the scofflaw list, Ms. Mangano sent one to us recently.
Yes, we all get the, we
Yes,
all
we
get the
received.
emails.
So there's
You're not alone.
$21,800 on here, and this is I don't know. I know there was a larger conversation about revenue that hasn't been recovered. I don't know how much of that. I think there's a lot more in parking revenue that hasn't been recovered
The
that's
state
not
comptroller did a
related
whole
to.
investigation.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is those don't all appear on the scofflaw list. But these people have, within 18 months, 6 tickets, 3 tickets, 17 tickets, 8 tickets, 5 tickets, 4 tickets. And again, the values that you're looking at here, $800, $700, $900, $700. So it's not necessarily, I think what people have to understand is the objective here is not that someone went to Main Street, missed their meter, and then we go and take their car from them. I mean, I think that what we're talking about here is people that sort of systematically get ticketed and then in wholesale ignore all of them. And those are the people that really we're looking at.
So to the point that Omar's making, so you communicate with these people. So yes, people do get paid. It's a fixed cost, but it's not really a fixed cost because all the economics go through every time you do more and more. So if you have to send 8 letters to one person or 10 letters, it's not just the stamp in the paper. You could argue, well, they would buy those envelopes anyway. No, it's actually incremental hours that could have been spent doing other things. At some point, they're not fixed costs anymore. And if you reduce that number, then every year when you do budget, your fixed costs actually get reduced or you find things for people to do that you maybe aren't able to do. And it's always like a discussion about variable cost and fixed, so it's not always like they're doing that anyway. If you have 8 or 10 or 15 tickets, you are costing all the people that aren't causing somebody to do all that work a fee that because somebody is in that other bucket. So I don't know why it's $200, for example, right? Like, I don't know why it wouldn't be $25. I don't know why it wouldn't be. So I agree with you. I never really thought about administrative costs. I think that's a punitive add-on. It's like you get a ticket on cell phone, then they add $100. You're like, why, right? Like, so I think that is worth looking at.
We have a $100 fee now.
No, I'm not, but I
I'm
think
just
the
saying,
point
just
is why is the
Because,
question.
well,
Yeah.
just what the code says. It's
Right.
administrative charge to cover the cost of booting and the release of the vehicle. That's what,
Now, I do
It's the booting.
believe that New York State, our administrative fees have to be reflective, I mean, at least they do for or is that just our permit fees, our building department fees? Because our fees have to be reflective of an actual expense. We can't just say it's $4,000 fee and it really only costs $50 worth of administrative time. Like, aren't we
That's it.
subject to some sort of parameters on what sort of administrative fees we can charge?
Yes,
I
so
I
we
thought that
are,
was New York
and-
State law.
And what we do is we look at the amount of time that it takes to process whatever that is. We did that in the building department.
Right.
And, it's $75 for an hour when you look at salaries and benefits and all that and the time it takes to process some of those things. So that's how we come up with those. There's also the philosophy of why should the taxpayers pay for me to take care of you if you continue to violate the law? You should pay that fee yourself, so.
think
I'd
it's
have to
worth
look at like what the responsibilities are when towing, but I mean, just for instance, if we follow the way that some of the other municipalities do, where we send the license plate reader out at nighttime, and that's typically when you'll find, because a lot of them are overnight parking tickets. They come across a car, they've then got to call for the tow truck. The police officer has to stay on scene until the tow truck comes, which could be 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. They then have to go inside and write a report on that. So there's a significant amount of time, and then on the other end of it, on the release, it's not a long time, but another 10 or 15 minutes there to complete a release, and to make sure all their paperwork's in order. So there is some time spent on it, but I hadn't really thought deeply about
neither
how
did I.
much the administrative cost, if any, should be. One of the things that the lieutenant's texting me now, because he does have strong feelings on all of this, was just that that scofflaw list right now is only based off of people that are that have that amount of that owe that amount, and after 18 months, he says that if we went strictly by the $500 limit, that there would be many, many more people on that because people are racking up more than $500 in fines much faster than 18 months. The scofflaw list we have right now is only listing people who owe that and exceeded 18 months. So, for instance, if I'm understanding what he's, and I'm reading quickly here, but if you have $1,000 worth of tickets in 12 months and you pay them every 12 months, you'll never actually appear on the scofflaw list. Whereas if we say after you rack up 500, we're going to come take your car, or even if you wanted to feel reasonable about it, after you rack up $1,000 in tickets, because we have people that come in with thousands of dollars in tickets, those people would get scofflawed much sooner than if we waited 18 months.
Current policy is if you get up 5,
Yeah.
Four
excuse me,
Four tickets.
that exceed
equate-
$500 in total fines.
Okay, so then you are forced to comply. You could this would either give you a boot or a tow.
No, the purpose, I think the purpose of the conversation
Yeah.
is for the tow.
We don't
tow.
now.
That's why we're
So,
discussing it.
sorry, hold on, I'm sorry.
That's the major
I'm just trying to-
change.
So a letter would go out,
At least
courtesy letter would go out, okay,
Since your car has now been scofflawed, this is what you're subject to.
yes. Then you would have to pay to whatever entities you have to pay. The tow truck, the administrative fee, and by the way, I'm not condoning people who are breaking the law and choosing to, I just, every community's different when it comes to a lot of factors. So I don't know. I'm a little sensitive to, I think it's different if we talk about people who really, I'm not saying that there's people who break the law less, because you break the law, you break the law. But I'm kind of more concerned about.
No, I think there has to be a reasonable standard. One of the other things he's just texting me about, because he handles parking, he works with Stuart pretty closely on parking, and he attends the court sessions and things like that from time to time. Connecticut and Pennsylvania will not hold your registration based on a scofflaw in New York. So those people driving and parking here without a state license plates, they're not answering tickets, and there is without this scofflaw coming in, there's no recourse for those parking tickets to be collected, because they can, like in New York, if you have a scofflaw, New York State will not allow you to renew your registration. It's a backwards version of what we're talking about here. New York State won't let you renew until you go clear your scofflaw, just like we won't lift your scofflaw until you're clear your fines. If your car is registered in Connecticut or Pennsylvania and you rack up tickets, Connecticut and Pennsylvania are not concerned with what fines they owe to us here in New York, so those folks can just continue registering their vehicles, and we have no way of collecting on those.
Okay.
Yeah, but the conversation that we started with, so now we have a little bit more of an understanding of the whole thing. You came to us because we don't currently have the towing piece. And you want us to add the towing piece to this discussion. And then we would like to also understand a few, let's call them fees, for lack of a better word that I can't find right now, which is looking at administration, looking at the numbers. I call it XY, like tickets and amounts, right? But really, you came here for the towing piece of this whole discussion.
Right, but
Yes?
the implementation of it would, yeah, you're right, but the implementation of it needs to be understood, because right now we don't have that towing piece, and we're not doing the boot. So if the towing piece is going to take place, then we need to understand what people are going to experience. So if I am a person, and I'm not, but if I am a person who has 4 tickets that are valued over $500, and currently it's 18 months, I don't know if it needs to stay at 18 months or what other
don't have
communities
that in
do.
our code.
We don't.
That's just
That's
the way
just the
they're doing
scofflaw
it.
list that we get from the court.
That's the one we get from the court,
Oh,
yes.
so we could ask the court to give us 6 months.
Like I said, I'd have to check with the lieutenant on why
Okay.
that differs
Okay,
from.
and that's not part of anybody else's code, Tarrytown or Portchester or anything else.
No, other ones have, for example, 3 tickets, but it's been 90 days since your court appearance was due. Or you have 4 tickets within 12 months, something like that. So some do that, others, as I said, also put in the dollar requirement.
I'm fine with putting in a parameter that makes sense, and I don't know what that parameter would be. The annoying part for the person who has to experience this in Ossining is we don't have a village court. So they have at least 2 windows, fortunately in the same building, but at least 2 windows that they need to go to pay, and the court window is open,
I believe it's 9:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m.
right, the middle of the workday.
Yeah.
5 days a week. That's a problem.
But that's a different conversation, and kind of going back to
We can't
to what
change that.
Tonight, part of the agenda is, I want to thank you, Stuart, and I want to thank you, Chief, because this is not the first time this board had this conversation. I want to make that very clear. This has been going on for over a year.
Well, no, this particular conversation about, no,
Yes, believe me.
not subjective, absolute no, because no, 'cause I was the one that wrote a memo asking to discuss towing. And it's not, I'm not trying to argue,
No,
but I'm just saying, like,
and I'm not. So I'm actually in favor of this. I agree with some of the stuff, how is that gonna implement? How do we do the implementation in regards to the police department? How do we put that into our coding? How is that gonna work? I'll leave that off to the chief. I'm sure, we can figure something out. And, this goes back to 2017, part 16, where we had a conversation with Lieutenant about this particular case. So yes, and my end is, yes, how can we make this work? And we should definitely make that adjustment in our bylaws by adding the word and any of the additional wording that could enforce this. So I'm in favor of this.
I just don't get the why part, so like,
Of taking the cars?
no, of like the towing versus the booting and,
Oh, so a boot is, I don't think you realize until you're holding like a tire how large it is and how heavy
It's
it is.
huge and it damages everything.
And there's realistically what you see with boots, particularly when you first start using them, is people who think that they're going to take them off, and then they damage their own car and the boot, and
And the
now
car in
we're
front of them,
dealing
because
with.
they're leaning on the car in
Right.
front of them. I lived up in Massachusetts where they do this.
Or
It's like-
there's people who may have different wheels on a car, where now we start taking claims for having damaged them, where the function of the tow truck is to take care of all that, and they take the liability on transport of the vehicle for the most part.
that makes sense.
And the other thing is, one other thing to think about is just from an aesthetic of the village, and I don't know if this is necessarily a popular opinion among the people who are going to have to retrieve their cars. If a boot is on your car and we start this and we have a lot of people on the list, I don't know if you want to have all of a particular road lined up with orange boots on the car.
Well, tow trucks instead, but
Well, the tow trucks would remove the vehicles,
One at a time.
which would
It's one at a
create
time.
lots of parking.
Actually, it's not funny, because in Boston, one of the problems with the boots is people with really old cars leave them there. They just, and the snow piles up, and it
Yeah,
actually
I-
causes problems.
Now,
Uh-oh.
if your vehicle is not reclaimed,
With the boot,
it
yeah.
is then abandoned and can be sold at auction.
Oh, my.
My God.
Okay, well, we're not there
And
yet.
the police
Oh, my
depart-
God. That
and
they
by
don't
s-
do in Boston,
And by state
actually.
law, the police department is allowed to keep
All right,
1%
we have one boot. I
or,
just,
or no more than 2 vehicles that are so.
So
Right
we're
now-
hoping that the Tesla has a lot of,
A similar, I
one
mean,
Tesla in the village, yeah.
something similar exists right now for the tow companies, because they oftentimes do get stuck with vehicles that people don't want to come back and reclaim. Once the tow fees exceed the value of the vehicle, then they can send it to auction, and they're allowed to recoup their costs.
Okay.
So I think there are some points that still need to be
So if-
discussed.
So
but-
you're going to put together a draft. We're not ready to have a public hearing on this.
No, I'm gonna put together a
Okay.
draft for you to look at, because I haven't even given you something to.
Well, what did we tell him? I'm like totally confused. So what are you putting a draft with?
well, you should have had a draft tonight.
Sure.
I'm fine with respects to, so with respects to the tow part, that's okay. When we start getting into the ticket and the number, that's where I feel like we have more conversation. If we're gonna do the tow part, and then you say, hey, once you rack up to $500 and you got a whole, there's a list of people, and tomorrow we're gonna go out and tow people, and they're gonna get a letter, that's one thing, right? Because clearly, the person with $836 in tickets, like you've been skating along for a long time. And that, hey, you're at $500, $800 some odd dollars. I just don't want a situation, as I had referenced earlier, where, you got 4 parking tickets, and then, someone's running around plopping your car for $60. So if
So you
it's,
wouldn't do that. I
That's
mean,
that's
not-
not the objective, and that's not how it would be
Yeah.
carried out.
I think they're talking, it's 500, should we make it like 250, 300, 400? I don't think,
In whatever way we would manipulate it,
anybody's
the
gonna go
objective
that
is to
low.
highlight those that are the worst offenders,
Right.
and generally the
the
cost
goal.
follows.
Right, and
So
it sounds like we could make the threshold a lot higher and still keep the tow truck companies very, very busy. Before we get down to the 4
Potentially.
tickets,
This is
500.
public record.
It's been foiled, I believe, so I think so, yeah.
Support.
Okay. All right. I think Stuart has enough for a draft, and then we have something to react to and to tweak from there.
And this is law
Thank you,
or
Chief.
change
This would be a local
in-
law.
Because we would have to add that in to where we already have for immobilizing vehicles, now we'd have to have for removal of vehicles.
And by the way, repair shops, if you don't pay your bill in a certain amount of time, they go and they can also take your car and sell it. It's not like this is all of this stuff's been around for like a century. We're not discussing new concepts here. But I think it's all about the numbers at this point, right?
Okay. So I think we're probably going to want to go out of order again, because I see we have a couple of folks here that have been very patiently waiting, and I think we could probably use a quick personal break, but come right back, because we're now 2 hours into our meeting, and we've gotten through 3 items. And so we'll come back and do Hudson Step, okay? Does that make sense? Stuart, Debbie, Hudson Step?
Absolutely fine, thank you, Mayor.
Is the microphone on?
And we're back, right?
We're
We're good,
back.
Tom? Okay, and we're continuing our habit of going out of order. We're gonna jump to Hudson Step Planned Waterfront Special Permit, and I see that the applicants are here. Stuart, you wanna give us some context?
Andy Klein here from the Bell Ellen firm with regard to the, I'm terribly sorry. It was there and I didn't turn it on. Andy Klein is here from the Del Bello Donnellan firm. This, Mayor, is for the planned waterfront special permit for the Hudson Step project. The planning board at its last meeting gave approval to the, approved a recommendation to this board for approval of the planned waterfront special permit. That recommendation is not yet signed and will be signed at the next planning board meeting, but there was a vote at the meeting that was conducted in March with regard to that. And Ms. Klein is here to present the application to this board. Annie?
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'm here on behalf of Austining Land LLC, the applicant for the Hudson Step project. The project is for a total of 189 units at the property located at 34 State Street, 21 James Street, and 27 Hunter Street. Also includes the historic rehabilitation of the Smith Robinson House into office space. I'm not sure how familiar some of you are. The planning board had a lot of turnover, so they were unfamiliar. But basically, we have the approvals expired, all of them, most of them. So we are going through the process right now. We've been to the planning board. We were going to the zoning board yesterday, but that's been pushed out a month, and we're here. So we're asking for reinstatement of the conditional use permit and site plan from the planning board, the planned special waterfront permit from your board, and some area variances from the zoning board, so that this project can get back on track. The delay, the reason the approvals expired was the process of getting the construction drawing set for a building permit was delayed, and the applicant thought that they would not expire based on some of the permits they got for rehabilitation work at the Smith Robinson House, but it was determined that those did not preserve the approvals. So that's why we're back here, hoping to get through this. So I'm here to answer any questions. Ed is here as well as the architect on the project. The planned special waterfront permit that we're asking from you is to permit a density bonus of 10 units per acre. So that would be a total of 32 units per acre, which permits the 189 units at the project. So in exchange for that, we are offering several amenities, and these are the same that were offered and approved previously. So historic preservation of the Smith Robinson House. We received a certificate of appropriateness, excuse me, from the Historic Preservation Commission in 2014, and that has not expired. And that was also a requirement of the Board of Architectural Review. They had an approval on October 27, 2015, requiring us to conform to that certificate of appropriateness, and also had approved some facade and other physical outside to the building. Just a slight change in footprint and facade materials, and that has also not expired. So that's historic preservation. Also, green building techniques. The project is designed to be 60 LEED points, which is LEED Gold. And there's the project was changed over the course of the original approvals process and through the environmental review to create a significant amount of open space. So there's 46% of the property will be landscaped, 7% will be plaza sitting areas, and there is a green roof as well. And then we also agreed and are still agreeing to and hoping to do some offsite infrastructure improvements. One of those was water main relining, which the village has since completed. And so there was an agreement in 2016 between the applicant and the village for a payment of $192,500 in lieu of performing the work ourselves. And so we intend to uphold that agreement and we'll make that payment. The other improvements include video inspection of the sewer segments on Hunter State and James Street and any repairs that arise from those inspections, and also some streetscape improvements, including sidewalks, additional crosswalks, formal crosswalk areas. And so, as Stuart said, we were at the planning board last month, and they approved a supplemental findings. So they decided to basically just readopt the previous finding statement from 2014. And so just determining that because the project is exactly the same and we are not proposing any changes, that there are no additional environmental impacts that were not already considered and mitigated in the previous environmental review. So
Remind me, when was the last environmental review undertaken? What year was that?
the finding statement was adopted in 2014.
Okay, the finding statement was adopted in 2014. And part of that was a traffic study, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is a new traffic study being undertaken?
No. We discussed it briefly with the planning board. And with staff. Since the project has not changed, the traffic counts for the apartments and the office remain the same. And the previous traffic study determined that that was a very minimal addition to the area, and did not really require any mitigation. No mitigation was required as part of the traffic study. The traffic study did not take a credit for any public transit-oriented project criteria. So it was estimated that potentially 25%, as much as 25% of the residents could in fact take the train or the nearby buses, but they did not consider that in the number that they came up with. So
I'm sure you're aware that since 2014, 25 State Street, which is an apartment with 5 stories of about 14 apartments on each floor, has opened. And right next door, obviously, the Asling Children's Center, we're going to an event in a couple of weeks. That's they're going to be their kickoff. So it's a really crowded street right now with traffic, and it was in 2014, and it's increasingly. So I'm surprised and disappointed, frankly, that the planning board did not demand a traffic study. And Stuart, could you remind us what exactly are we? A waterfront special permit is a bonus density, right? That's coming to us for our approval.
Bonus density. So I should also point out, Mayor, that the zoning board still has to opine here. There are variances that are being requested as relate to parking, as relate to the underground parking in particular. So I know that the first time that Ms. Klein appeared before them, some questions were raised about traffic as well. So I think that's going to be another issue that may come up with the zoning board in terms of that.
Can the zoning board compel them to do a traffic study?
They can make it. I'll answer it this way. The cases are split in terms of what a particular land use board can ask for, even after there has been an environmental review or a completion of environmental review. I should also point out that the site plan has not yet been approved by the planning board. What has been approved is simply that we've adopted the prior finding statement. So to the extent that the planning board continues to have to look at the site plan in terms of what is there and what is in the other locations, including Ossining Children's Center at 32, 25 State Street across the street, that is still before the planning board and will be up for discussion at their next meeting, which is 2 weeks from yesterday. As I look at
I thought you
the watch,
counted the
that's really
hours.
gonna
So,
at 7 p.m.
I just wanted to echo that. OCC is a major. I mean, we're excited for it, but it's a major facility that's going to be bringing hundreds of parents and staff, and they'll have parking, so that's not really an issue. But I mean, that street is going to be a lot busier in general.
So we have a director of planning kind of saw this application. She didn't felt that this particular project doesn't meet the criteria of meets the criteria of 4 years ago. Then nothing has changed. So her pretty much, she's not here. So I'm kind of asking you, Stuart, what was her take on this particular situation, I guess?
The take from the director of planning, and I was involved to some extent with that, was that with regard, since the application presented by Hudson Step now is a mirror of what was their earlier application, and there was a full environmental impact statement done at that time. It did not mandate a reopening of the environmental impact statement. Let me just point this also out, that with regard to Ossining Children's Center, there were questions asked during its presentation with regard to traffic, because when Ossining Children's Center made its presentation, Hudson Step was in fact a project that had already, was on the books. I don't know where it was. I don't know if the approvals had lapsed at that point. I think when OCC first filed, I think those approvals were still there. Now, Ossining Children's Center was not asked to do a traffic study, but they were asked to do a study with regard to the buses that would be coming with regard down that street. And that was information that was provided by the Transportation Department for the school district. So they did get that. And in fact, I know that I believe the director of Ossining Children's Center was at, I think, the most recent planning board meeting or an earlier meeting involving Hudson Step, where he raised certain issues, not relating to traffic, but more with regard to solar, if you remember, in terms of what that impact would be.
So my question is, how many parking spaces are you providing on site?
There are 300. Do you have it right?
230. Underground.
Underground?
Yeah.
How many of them are going to be for public use?
None.
None. So you potentially, in your numbers, there's about 25% of the parking that's going to be unused. Based on your study, you had said that
Oh, no, that was not parking. That was traffic.
Okay, that was just traffic.
Yeah, that was just traffic counts. They didn't take a credit for the number of cars leaving and coming into the property in the peak morning, peak evening, commuter times with regards to the transit-oriented development aspects of the project being so close to the train and the bus.
And just in your professional opinion, how many people do you think will actually be going to the train station versus actually coming with their cars?
The train station's pretty close, and part of our off-site improvements is to encourage access from the site to the train station and from just the area in general. So, people of my generation would prefer to use the train. I know we're really getting away from cars. Cars are expensive. Cars are a pain. So, yeah, I think that it's very possible.
Now, I believe at one time in the life of the project, there was a community garden. Is that
There was never a community.
there was never a community garden?
May have been requested, but
Might
there
have
was,
been
no, I think it was very clearly not a community garden.
Okay, it was a discussion. Okay.
Final site plan.
Hunter Street.
Okay.
side.
Okay. All right.
Oh, you're right. The question was, no, thank you for, I knew exactly. Yeah, but it was on the Hunter Street side. It would only be accessed from Hunter Street because the developer didn't really have a use for it. So it was, I don't know if that was ever finalized as far as one of the public amenities. That's interesting. Thank you for remembering that.
So I have a few. I don't know.
No, you can.
I have a few questions. So I'm gonna ask the same question I asked the developer when he was here a couple years back. Let's say you get all the approvals. When do you think first question, do you have the funding? Two, if you have the funding, when construction will start?
We have been working with the building department during this whole process. We're very, very close to getting the drawings finalized for a building permit. As soon as these approvals are back, we intend to file for a building permit as soon as possible. I was told by my client that he is filing for a demolition permit tomorrow for the manufacturing buildings on the property, and they finalized that. We're working on getting financing in place. That was part of the reason that this was delayed, but he's working very diligently. They really want to get this project happening. They're serious about it, and that's why we're here trying to do this.
So, as long as I've been sitting in this board, and I took a year off, this board has allowed or given extensions to this particular project several times. Correct me, how many?
I
Three
think
times?
this board gave 3.
3 times.
I think this
I think that
board.
was the legal max we could give. Right?
So 3 times. When was the approvals? The first time's approvals, 2016. From the planning board?
2014. Oh, from the planning board? The planning board was 2015.
2015. Right now we're in 2019.
Yes.
So you're telling me, again, a couple years back, your client was in front of us. He said, we have the funding. We are in 2019. What's the difference? Because last time he said, we have the funding, and then he came back, said, we need a pilot. So what is different now in 2019 that was in 2017 or 2016 or 2018?
I think that there was the economic development funding issues that they've stepped away from. That since then there was some difficulties getting the drawings finalized. I know that he had some issues with people, with his consultants, and working with the village's consultants and just finalizing the drawings. That's taken much, much longer than anyone was expecting, and that's resulted in this delay. I have not been a part of this process, but I know for the entire time we were brought in for this recently, but I know that they are really excited to get this going, and they really mean business this time, and they understand the village's frustration. They're frustrated too, and so we're just really hoping that.
And that's fine, and that's great. You know what is interesting though? For the past couple of years that property's been empty. The maintenance of that property has been an eyesore in that neighborhood.
Absolutely.
And I remember being in the planning board when you guys first came back about 2 months ago, and you showed nice pictures of James, State, no Hunter. And you had the client of this particular project was in front of the court for violations. And your statement was, yes, we did a cleanup the weekend before. The client did a cleanup the week before you were in front of the planning board. But this whole time, this property hasn't been kept.
I just want to make sure I understood you correctly. You said once you get this permit and you will finalize the drawings, that then you will try to seek financing again?
Oh, no, they're working on that right now. No, we'll try to get the building permit as soon as
Okay.
possible
So
and
you have
get it going.
so you're telling me you have finance, or are you still working on it?
I don't think she said that.
We're working on it,
Okay.
but part of the reason the financing is not in place is because these approvals expired and they can't get the money until these approvals are back in place. So once these approvals are back in place, finalize the financing and then finish up those drawings and get the building permit as soon as possible.
Stuart, can you explain to us, I'm delighted to hear that the demolition permit is going to, the intention is to move forward with applying for that permit as soon as possible. That's not something has to wait for the planning board or any other land use
No,
boards,
that-
that they can just go in and show up at the building department and fill out their paperwork and get that approval.
That's correct, Mabel.
Okay. And then just to clarify for folks, it's demolishing the add-ons to the historic building. That's the demolition that needs to happen. Right. Okay. But the historic building obviously would be intact. And that's not exactly something
Yeah.
that's being offered. That's something that's required because it's a landmark building.
Right, yeah, and they're also working on making impressions of the molding within the building just in case they can't find it commercially. They'll have it created. So they're working with that. And my client also has reached out to the HBC to give them a tour of the Smith Robinson house, and he's hoping to get a call back from them about some dates where he can give them a tour.
Which has been canceled several times because I'm part of the email change as well.
Okay. I mean, I talked to him today, and he was hoping to hear.
It's just, again, I want to make sure that the impression
You're
from the
implying
client
that it was
is
canceled by whom?
by the client.
Oh, okay.
When was the last date that?
I will have to check my emails.
Okay.
But Stuart,
I think it was an early May date.
correct.
Was, I think, there was some discussion.
There was a couple days that were canceled that were trying to figure it out and nothing has happened.
Okay, I'll let him know.
So once you file your demolition permit, how long will it take you to actually demolish the buildings?
I'm not sure exactly how long it will take to demolish a building. I know that they intend to, once they submit the permit, they intend to get started on it. But I don't know exactly what that timeline would be.
Is this the first time they've applied for a demolition
There was
permit?
an earlier demolition permit, Trustee Bazemore, and that resulted in some asbestos abatement that was done and has been completed. So this would be a second demo permit that they're coming in for. And it's the first I'm hearing that they're doing that. Building department has specific regulations in terms of what has to be done and what insurance has to be provided. Once that's all in place, they would be able to start the demo process.
No, well, because of the nature of the work the first time, does that mean they couldn't have knocked down the buildings the first time after
I
doing the
think the
asbestos?
initial demo permit was for a different, was within the lots they own, but I don't believe it was the particular building that Ms. Klein is talking about here.
Okay.
So I think that's part of what's going on, but, at least it looks like they're moving in that direction to do that. But that can be issued without planning board approval.
And Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong. They also had building permits or some sort of building permit for the restoration,
Just for the Smith Robinson house,
Right.
that is correct.
and they didn't do any work at that time.
The only work I'm aware of, Trustee Quezada, that they did related to, in fact, let me stop that. There was no work done with regard to the one building permit that was issued, and it was the determination through my office that the permits had all effectively lapsed, all the approvals had lapsed, and that's why they are now back before the various boards to get their approvals.
Ms. Klein, when did you join this? When did this become your account?
November.
Okay. So as you can see, we're very familiar
I
with
know.
this. We live here, we hear from neighbors, and there's a lot of history, and you've caught up on a lot of it, but maybe you're hearing a little more tonight, the sentiment, because our job is to listen to the community members and to represent a lot of what we hear. And the frustration is in part that nothing happened. For whatever variety of reasons is your understanding, what we've been told, what we've witnessed over recent years. But meanwhile, they haven't been very good neighbors. And that's been touched on a little bit tonight when it comes to the property maintenance. But it really is seen as just, we want to be welcoming and encouraging of great developments, and there are a lot of really positive things about this design, and it is grossly underutilized property right now, and it is a vacant and abandoned property for the most part, and it is really, really it's an eyesore, a really, really big eyesore in the neighborhood, and it's really insulting to their neighbors to maintain their property as they have for so many years. So that if you're feeling less than welcomed, that's a big part of the reason. I do also want to ask a procedural question, the $192,500 that was referenced, which had been part of the original agreement originally it was for water lines. We've since done the water lines because that was a neighborhood that was really in need. The way that the agreement had been structured, as I recall, was that amount, and maybe others as well, but that was the really big one, would be paid at the time of C of O.
That is correct, Mayor.
Is it more typical that payment is made earlier in the process, like when the building permit is pulled?
One of the things, I can't comment as to what's more typical. That I don't know, but I know that was what was negotiated, and that's what also appears in the original site plan approval that was given back in.
Which is now irrelevant.
But there was a separate agreement with regard to that. One of the matters that I had discussed with council and other council at the office was that since the village has in fact already done the work to consider, advancing that payment, because the C of O may take a while because we're not even at the stage of a shovel in the ground at this point.
Right.
And clearly the work was done. There's no question the village did it on its own dime. So perhaps that's a discussion that I think could well be had with council and also through the planning board, because that would be another provision through the site plan approval in terms of that particular payment that we're talking about.
Okay.
And probably to me, it's like even if we want to extend this because of the history of this particular developer within itself, is I would like to see, I don't know if the board will even agree to that, but I would like to see if we can get the money to get the connections between James and Hunter like it was originally planned for the offsite improvements. So I don't know if the rest of the board will even feel.
Break the hill?
Yeah, so when you were talking about sidewalk improvements, were you including the connection between, that's a part of that, right? When you were talking about amenities?
Yeah. Yeah. So there were sidewalks on both sides of Hunter Street. I mean, Ed can talk. He was part of the original negotiations on this, but sidewalks on both sides of Hunter Street, and then a crosswalk across Hunter Street, and then formal crosswalks across the north end of Hunter to Seeker Road. And then what was the other?
Good evening, everyone. You are correct, Ms. Klein. There is one more bonus density improvement off-site, and that is the connection from the circular dead end of James Street down to Hunter.
Okay.
Right, so that will be then a walk path that was negotiated through, and also some stormwater control, because it is a steep hill, breakneck path or whatever.
So kind of find a less daunting name for that.
An appropriate name.
I know, that's why I can always keep coming back to it, because nothing else is clear.
It's like before you start, you get the idea of what you're about to face.
Did you want to add something, Trustee Herrera?
After you, sir. I just want to ask, Stuart,
what is being asked right now for us to consider,
What, yeah.
to put this as for next week and vote on it for a special permit? Is
No.
that-
Calling for a public hearing.
You have to call for a public hearing first.
Okay.
So at a minimum, if you wanted to, next week, you could consider a resolution to call for the public hearing. But you need the public hearing before you could have the vote.
Okay.
And as with Hidden Cove, you have 62 days to make your decision after the public hearing is closed.
So you're suggesting that next week on the 17th, we call for a public hearing to take place May 1st, and then we either close it or not and keep it open. And it's 62 days from the time it closes. Okay. All right. All right. Is everybody comfortable with putting this on for a public hearing?
Yeah, I just haven't shared anything about this yet. I just wanted to listen because I had a gap as well from the board. But so first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. So I really have to stress, I've spoken to the majority of property owners and tenants on that street and around that street. I've walked with them. And I would have a really big problem living there right now, me personally. I mean, you would hear from me in many ways. I think that having that bad taste in their mouth, not alleged, none of it's alleged, I think just really, it makes it seem, and it's not an allegation, but it makes it seem as if an investor or a developer or a person saw an area that they thought they can get away with just neglecting a property until they could do what they would like to do, as is their right on private property. And I'm the person who would love to see that property just look better and have a use and be part of our, economic development and housing. But I think, that particular neighborhood does have pretty much very important historical context in a community, culturally, economically, many ways. And any project, especially in that part of our downtown, is sensitive in general. I'm not saying that we're going to stop or impede any new development, but it really, when you don't have and now I am speaking for parts of the community buy-in or trust, you've actually seen the neglect, just puts at least me in a very hard position. I mean, I hate walking by that property on any part of it. And that's when I could actually walk on the sidewalks or around it, when it's not actually being impeded by bushes or other stuff. The public amenities part, I really do need a full list as to what determines what a public amenity is. So I'm very happy that the restoration of that building is being done. I'm very happy that you went through the HPC process and that you're still working with them. But I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, is that going to be a public building for public use?
No, it's going to be office space,
Okay.
private
Okay.
office space.
So I don't consider that public amenity. That's just you preserving a piece of property on your property that should be preserved.
They're legally obligated to preserve the exterior. They can
Okay.
do whatever they want to the interior, I think, right, Stuart?
Yeah, and I'm not, but I just don't consider it a public, amenity. I would like to understand a little bit more with Paul and the manager about stormwater, and now that we did the work already with the water relining, it's very vague right now what a public amenity would be. So like
Stormwater management would be a requirement as well.
right. So I guess I'm just trying to understand.
So,
for the density bonus, exactly what is the community getting?
There's a section in the zoning code for this planned waterfront special permit, and it lists several amenity options that the applicant can provide. Right, yes, and so they're defined there, and we do, with what we're offering, it does fall under those provisions, so that's where we're getting those amenities from.
Hopefully next week, Stuart, when we call for the public hearing, we can clarify exactly what are the public amenities that are on that list that are being included here, that aren't just requirements, but that are actual above and beyonds that justify the special permit.
So if building is being used for office space, how much office space will be there?
It's about 7,000 square feet.
And how much parking are you building for that office space?
So as part of the site plan approval, the parking as part of the zoning code for a live workspace, the parking there's no additional parking required. It's combined into the parking that's required for the residential site and will be used.
Which I guess is why the applicant always talked about it as office space that they would be inviting their residents to make use of. Although presumably if there's a resident who's opening up their law practice there, they would have clients.
With cars.
Would it be safe to say that, I mean, so it's done, it's private property, we kind of be like a gated community?
Will there be a gate?
There's fencing around, but there's no gate at either of the entrances.
In the actual plans, will there be a gate or will it be open campus?
And the EAC looked at this when? They didn't have a quorum for like a decade.
True, but our code provided that in fact, if the EAC could not consider it, the planning board basically is the default agency can.
But it's so long ago, wouldn't we ask for one to be done now? I don't understand. I mean, the time lapse is long.
I appreciate that. I was looking at the particular things that had lapsed, and certain things did not lapse. Certain things in our code do not have time lapses.
So if it doesn't have a time lapse, we can't demand one?
BAR approval does not lapse. HPC approval does not lapse. Our code, so, you know, I don't think there's a basis to then say to the applicant, well, you're gonna have to basically do the whole thing all over again. I recognize the time frame, but planning board, zoning board, conditional use, those specifically have timeframes to them. And if they're not met, they have to start the process again. We don't have similar language with regard to those other applications.
I'd be surprised if the EAC didn't meet. This was long enough ago that they did have a quorum. There's no record of the EAC having provided minutes to the planning board?
I'd have to read the site plan.
This is like 2014.
They oftentimes
I'll look in
didn't.
the site plan resolution because it would reference it if there was in fact a positive referral from them. I'll look at that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It looks like we're gonna put it on for
Just want to
Yeah.
be from the record because I'm not going to be able to be next week. I am actually not in support of this application to go on to public meeting. So just want to be that.
So you're against.
Correct.
you're against calling for a public hearing.
Correct. At this point, yes.
All right. Well, but okay. Is most of the board supportive of calling for a public hearing, which would allow the community to come and ask some of the same questions that we have?
Yes.
Are we required to, Stuart?
When you get since you've received the recommendation from the planning board, the answer is the process is that you have to call for public hearing. You can't sit on the application.
Although that's a little bit of an overstatement.
You haven't gotten the formal, is that what you're?
Yes.
As I indicated in my memo to you.
Right.
To be precise.
Because we've been through this before,
The
actually.
planning board approved the recommendation at its last meeting. The signed recommendation, the formal signed report from the planning board chair will be signed at the next planning board meeting, which is 2 weeks from yesterday. So the code talks about receiving the report from the planning board. What you have not gotten is the formal report from them. You just have what the vote was at the last meeting. So if you wanted to, I'm just saying that, you could wait till the report was received, which will be after the next planning board meeting. And then you can, at that point, if you thought it necessary, call for your vote. You could do it that way. I'm just.
Is there any time sensitivity to this that we need to be aware of, other than eagerness?
I mean, we can't get our financing to start this until we have these approvals, so we are.
But we're not the last approval.
We're doing this in tandem, so.
But you don't have any of the approvals yet, right?
No, we just have the environmental.
So we're not holding you up at this point.
No, because they still need planning. I have two approvals from planning, and they need zoning.
Okay. So am I hearing that people would prefer that we wait until we have the formal report, which means that it would be our next work session would be the 24th. No, our next, we could on May 1st, we would then call for the public hearing to take place May 15th.
Stuart, please, and I have no problem with the dates and stuff like that, but we sort of, like, last week we passed 2 resolutions, show a special permit and variances on, anyway. But we were sort of the last board on that process for a special permit.
Almost.
After yes, they still have to go in front of the HPC. But that was sort of like the last piece of the puzzle in a way of that process. Why can we be that? Because I'm interested to see what the zoning board has to say. Because again, there's new members on the board in that particular scenario. So what does that mean?
I always like to open up the book. In terms of the special permit, let me just turn to be precise here so I don't have it wrong. Okay. The application for the special permit is filed simultaneously with the application. The applicant for a special permit shall file simultaneously the application for site development plan approval. That was done here, so that's what's done. And the village board sent it to the planning board for its recommendation, and then the village board, upon receipt of the report by the planning board, shall within 62 days of such receipt, and that's the other point, conduct the public hearing. So again, you could get the report, and you need to schedule the public hearing within 62 days.
The first opening, yeah.
First
We need to
open-
open the public hearing within
Open it,
62
and
days.
then once it's closed, you have 62 days then to
Okay.
issue your determination.
So it doesn't sound like we need to have this on next week's agenda then to call for the public hearing because we haven't received the report yet. All right, so then let's wait until we receive the report and then we'll call for it at the next legislative session.
Done.
And I don't unless something changes. I think most of us are willing to have the public hearing, but we should wait until we have the report. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Klein. I just.
Not
All we
done
have left
tonight,
is
it's
the,
10:20.
Kiosk and the bench and tree. We have some exec and advice of council stuff.
You could wait on the bench and tree donation.
That's not you would. Is that okay?
Is that with the Greg Jackson situation?
Bench and tree?
Yep.
No, I think it's a form.
It's the, it's actually the
Well, that's
policy.
what they want. So the policy would have to be in place so that we can move forward. They're meeting this week.
Right.
So I'm asking if one is dependent on the other because that's what came up on Monday in the meeting.
I don't think we're gonna take too long on this kiosk.
Oh, yeah?
I don't think we're gonna. I don't think we're
I'm
gonna.
sort of thinking you're wrong.
Okay. Listen, I don't think. Listen.
Omar's
I'll
right
keep
here,
it.
my
I'll
friend.
keep it real simple.
I'm gonna start
I'll keep it
ordering
real
like dinner.
simple.
All right. I don't think it's gonna. Yeah, you're one person, maybe two. Okay. All right. So what we're saying is no. We should move forward with both of these. So we're gonna do a little bit more of a quickness. All right.
Okay,
Madam Clerk.
let's do the,
Madam Manager.
whatever. We'll do the park tree and park bench donation. Did all of you have an opportunity to read it? It's gone through the Recreation Advisory Board and they have approved this. So if you have any issues, concerns, it's a great way for us to get some new benches and we outlined the parameters. So
Okay.
if you're happy with that, we'll move forward.
And the
Yes.
process for this moving forward is what?
We say yes
We
and
need
he
to
moves forward.
resolve to adopt this or we
No,
Isn't it just an internal
We
rec
just
function?
do it.
for-
yeah, I mean,
It's
let's,
basically an
Yeah.
operational thing.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's fine.
So
guys
you
are
don't
okay
have to
with
do
this, you can
anything
go
as
with
long as you know what it is and you're comfortable.
Trustee Levin, did you want to give us a little background on the Rec Advisory Board experience with this?
No, we met Monday. They want to do this. I need to stretch. I'm going to start exercising soon. you know, they get a lot of requests. They're trying since last year to systemize people walk in. They want to do this for their uncle and this for their first grade teacher. And it's overwhelming for a board that meets once a month. So they've been trying to create policies. People don't realize that they have to pay for it. The village and taxpayers are not paying for all these memorial things. So, you know, you got to raise the money. And yes, some people have money and some people don't, but everybody, it's not something that the community center is going to be paying for, that the taxpayers. So they wanted to create a policy that's fair and equitable to every person, and that's public information so people can look at it and understand it. And, you know, they took a lot of care and a lot of thought went into it, and we do have a request coming up so that's why I was just concerned that I didn't want to not discuss it, because I know on Monday when I went to the meeting as the liaison, I don't want this to hold anything up, that
That's
we
fine.
didn't discuss it, that's all.
Just
So,
real quick,
I mean, people can email if they want to look at it again.
this policy will, and nothing to do with the town
Mhm.
parks, but will that oversee the whole thing, all the parks within Ossipee?
Village. It's the village, but the town, we're trying to, like, if they have something, we try to copy it. If we have, because as you know, the Park and Rec has both myself as a village and the town, and we're trying to coordinate all this stuff so that people in the public don't get any more confused than they need to be.
All right.
Do we know if the town board has reviewed it?
I do not know if the town board
I
has
have a
reviewed
meeting
it.
with Dana in the morning. I'm happy to go over it with her and give her a copy of this and see if they want to review it.
You could just also just email and advance also Jackie Shaw, who's the liaison. It just makes
Or
things
if-
easier.
If in fact the town approves it, then, because right now it says park tree and park bench donation, so it doesn't specifically
The
indicate.
village.
That makes, okay,
So
so.
if in fact they're okay, we may want to indicate so that it's for
Village and town, yeah.
all
And
parks.
but if they're not,
Right.
then it doesn't say village.
No,
But we
that's
can
my other
change the
point.
So it should say village until
It
it
should
says, it can say
say-
both.
Or nothing, and tomorrow maybe everybody can agree on it and save us all a little
I
bit
just
of
wanted
ink
to
Have a word.
and make life easier.
All right.
Okay, that was
That was
quick.
so
Next.
quick.
All right, moving on.
All right.
Kiosk.
So the kiosk at Henry Gordian Park. I wasn't here when it was built. It's really beautiful. That does serve bathroom facilities, and it has a beautiful awning that I've never seen open. And last year I had a request from someone who was interested in perhaps renting bicycles out of there, but when I asked for a proposal, it never came to fruition. So this year I had an application or an inquiry as to whether or not we would be willing to lease out the facility for just a summertime snack place. Maybe serve coffee in the morning and little snacks and ice cream and things like that. So I just really wanted to openly talk with you about what the intended purpose of the kiosk was when it was built. And then are you amenable to leasing that space to a vendor for the summer? And if so, under what conditions?
And just clarity, I'm not going to give my opinion on this. I just need to know, electricity in there? Is there electricity at all in there?
There's electricity and there is a sink and there's water. And there's a hot water heater, but there's no refrigerator or anything. So anybody that wanted to make that a snack location would have to invest money into the equipment that could fit in there. And again, it's very small, so you're not going to
How
see.
many square feet is it inside? Do you know?
Oh gosh, I do not.
And it's small.
But it's very small. You know, maybe
It's a counter.
it's a counter. You could put a small refrigerator and maybe like an ice cream, open
They
up.
could do a hot dog roller on the counter.
You could do something like that, right? So
Size of food truck then, basically. Okay.
yeah, it is. But it is kind of a shame to not see anything there. And on the summer, it's very busy along the parkway, and it's just I just wanted to know how you felt about it and what the intended purpose was.
Can I go first? Or
You're already going for it.
all right. Okay. So in general, when we're talking about spots in the village, like something like this, I'm in favor of leasing it. But to me, what I think is like the village should have specs. Like we should advertise the spot, right?
Okay.
And then once people come in and do their submissions, then it's okay. But like when you have like say a potential person coming in, then you have the situation where someone says, I didn't know this was up for grabs. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. So I'm in favor of leasing it and using it as a source of revenue. I just think from a village standpoint, we should have public information like, hey, we are leasing the village kiosk.
This is
and-
available.
And this is available. This is the specs. This is how big it is. This is where it's located. If you have any more information, please contact, the village manager's office, and I can give you a tour, and then, we can do something. So that's my brief piece on that.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that we have a unique opportunity to have that space, especially where it's at. So I think that we should be creative on how we decide who uses it or what the time. So whether, you have Austin Innovates, the Chamber of Commerce, you have independent entrepreneurs and pop-up people that are in our community. How do we use that space? Whether we determine that, it's being rented every 3 months or by season, I don't know. But how do we, not to say that we want to discourage investors that could afford to really invest in the place and do all that, but how do we encourage local entrepreneurs and businesses and startups, maybe even some students from Rockland High School through a program, or I don't know, to use, it's a public building, and we don't have to do an RFP process like in the corporate sense, but do we do a competition for it? But definitely make it open to, as Trustee Bazemore said, open and accessible to all, because it's such a rare opportunity to even be able to have the opportunity to consider being in that spot. It's one of the our assets that everyone loves and goes to. Clearly, people are going to want to be there in the summer, but we had a discussion about food trucks, about how entrepreneurship and businesses is no longer just a brick and mortar, right? So you have people who move around all the time. You have people who only do street fairs and they have their tent in their truck, and they go from Tarrytown to Ossining to Yonkers to so we had the opportunity and the potential to have a really unique something, and it may not even be food. It may be something else that could be done at the waterfront. I don't know, but I just think that it's a good opportunity, and not that I don't want to be grateful of the investor or the business person that came to us, but I think that we should just take some time to really explore all options for it.
So is it, I'm aware of, I was not aware of the person who wanted to do bike rentals, but I'm aware that somebody came last year and wanted to know what would be the cost to rent it, because they wanted to create a business plan, and that obviously is one of their big questions. So if the village, and maybe this is a way to not say no to the person who has a whole plan, and they really know, they really have a vision for it, and they have an investor and they want to move forward. And he's actually been coming to us for a while, and this is the first time we've had a public discussion about it, so I'm glad we're finally having the public discussion. But it does seem reasonable to figure out, we have this property. Do we really understand exactly what it can be used for? And the Department of Health, I mean, if a tenant were going into a regular building, they would find out, what can I really do here? Can I do cooking? Can I just serve prepackaged ice cream? Yeah, so it does, yeah, but but we should know what is the value of this property that we have, and be able to say to the public, look, the village has this lovely little opportunity. This is what our understanding is, the general potential uses for it, and we kind of need to decide what we will. I assume there's some property and maintenance, there's some value to that, and the village should be compensated for what that value would be. And I don't know what that is. But how long would it take for us to put together what that looks like, and then put it out? And we can just put it out for 30 days, because maybe we can have something. Is it unreasonable to have something by this summer? I don't know. Maybe that's too soon.
I think the person that came to us is ready to move forward.
Okay.
But again, if you want to do it in more of an open and session, then I think that what I would need is, how long do you want us to advertise that, or how do we reach out to people that you think might?
I think 30 days is fine to be.
So yeah, in general, when if you put something out and you say, hey, I'm renting. If I say I'm renting a spot, the first person who comes, it's you'll grab it if it's a good idea, or if you feel like you want to do it. I'm just saying, from a process standpoint, people just need to know that that's an option, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. It's all about process. Whether it's this guy, I don't even know who we're talking about, but or woman or yeah, or whom, yeah, exactly.
Advantage when we haven't even started a public process for the public building, public property,
Okay.
Okay, but,
What did you envision when it was built?
yeah, what was it built for?
Nobody was particularly on the board when this was particularly envisioned. Some of us were on the board when it was eventually voted on, but this aspect of it was pretty minor.
It's sad that it's sitting there not doing anything.
I think it could be up and running by this summer, though.
Okay.
So anybody that comes in and says, I'll do the paperwork, what does it cost me? We can't really answer that.
So I think
But
that
how will we answer that? Like, it's one thing to say, give me ideas on what you want to do. All good. You know, I want to create a little moving museum. I want to open an ice cream parlor. I understand I got to take this and that. I'd like to put tables around, yes or no. We could do a yes or no. No, you can't put tables. Yes, you can. But, like, the person answering those questions is never going to be the one that says, I'm willing to pay $100,000. Because I think if you asked me, I'd say I'll pay you $10. I mean, you know, like, you got to have something to give people. This is not like an art project, or if you want to make it an art project, if this is not about revenues and business, if this is about like, you know, a project, an art project, an informational booth for what's to do in Austin, then it's a very different thing. But like, I just feel like we got to do, you can't leave that open-ended because some minor things you have to say to someone, like, what are we charging for?
Yeah, no, I think.
So what
The
would
commercial
that be?
space has a value.
Yeah, that's what
We
I'm saying.
should know
like,
what that is.
Yeah, so I
So-
think we're all saying the same thing.
And Debbie,
Okay, so you guys are going to come up with the
Commercial real
value
estate person should be able to tell us, yeah.
of the value of both, and then look on the outside if there's even an
Look at
opportunity. I
dimensions.
think Omar said for some tables or picnic
have the
tables
drawings.
and what that
We
is.
should have as-built drawings for
Oh,
the
yeah.
whole site.
Okay,
We
so
do.
that we can do.
Hope so.
And
Alright.
some file that's about.
The other value that that building is providing is it is the surface upon which all of those panels about the historic Hudson River and Austining are. So it
And
does,
a
it
lot
does,
of people read them.
and they are lovely, yes. Anyway,
Okay.
meeting, motion to adjourn to executive session for purposes of real property
Correct.
and personnel.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And with that, thank you very much for joining us. Join us next week at the Birdsall Fagan Police Park Court facility for our regular meeting at 7:30. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.